Chapter 585. It was already 9:45 p.m. by the time Luonan walked into the house. The clear sound of the zither passed through the door and entered his ears before he even entered the door. The subtle sound of him opening the door was also completely drowned out by the bright and lively sound of the strings being plucked. It was to the extent that in the living room, besides Ruei-1, who was sitting in a standard posture on the piano stool facing the door, no one else noticed his arrival. A family concert? Even though Luonan's mood couldn't be considered all that great, he still relaxed a bit. He quietly changed his shoes in the entrance hall and walked into the warm living room. Right now the entire family was gathered around the sofa in the living room, aside from Luonan who had just returned. His uncle and aunt sat on the main sofa, shoulder to shoulder, with their backs against the door. Only the back of their heads was exposed. Emopeng sat on his aunt's side. He rested an arm on the armrest and swayed back and forth, but his body was sprawled on the carpet. He was very comfortable, but in terms of comfort it still belonged to Emoya, who occupied one side of the sofa and the chaise lounge. This sister didn't have a proper posture when lying down. She didn't have a proper posture when sitting. Her slender waist rested on the armrest. Her long legs were half bent and half straight. She was so idle that it made one's hair stand on end. Yet she still held the guitar. Her fingers and the plectrum plucked the guitar strings back and forth. She was as agile and dazzling as ever. This song was adapted from a classic rock song. Emoya had returned to her old profession and was in charge of the melody. Luonan listened to this part. The interludes and gorgeous polyphonic interpretation, and even the finger-picking techniques were used. The rich timbre and improvisational variations perfectly verified the high validity of the nickname, Finger Palace. Compared to Emoya, Ruei-1 sat upright under the cover of Emoya's gorgeous melody. Not only was her posture much more rigid, she mostly strummed the strings, and she occasionally broke down the chords back and forth. She also appeared much simpler. However, the metal strings beneath her fingers vibrated slightly. The resonant amplification of the single panel box allowed the deep and penetrating timbre to be divined out. This was probably the best standard that the mid-range practice guitar in her hands could achieve. What was even more beautiful was the precise control. It could be said that she had firmly grasped Emoya's nearly casual and colorful rhythm. So much so that Luonan was nearly unable to distinguish whether the rhythm carried the melody, or whether the melody carried the rhythm. The song was quite simple, but it was almost perfect for two guitars. At the end of the song, before Emoya could comment, Emopeng was already cheering loudly and praising, "Ruei-1's rhythm is unparalleled. I'll speak properly." Luo Shuqing slapped her son's scalp. Emopeng didn't even have time to complain when Ruei-1 stood up from the piano stool. She nodded her head in greeting towards Luonan. Only now did the others see Luonan enter the door. Luo Shuqing also stood up. She looked up at her watch and frowned. "It's almost 10 o'clock. You've been wandering outside all day. How did you learn from Emopeng?" "Mom." Emopeng was just about to prop himself up, but he didn't have any strength left. He was filled with grief and indignation. "I go home on time every day. Why aren't you worried that Nanster will lead me astray? Go upstairs and sleep." Luo Shuqing gave her son a light kick. She had the heart to instruct Luonan a few more times, but when she thought of the special circumstances her nephew was in right now, she was unable to continue for a time. Luckily, her husband spoke up at this time. "It's already 10 o'clock. Ruei-1 has practiced the piano for nearly 2 hours. She must be tired. Everyone should go to sleep. Yep. Nan needs to adapt to the new rhythm as soon as possible. You're still young. Learning to enrich yourself and laying down your foundation is the most important thing. You need to calm your heart." Luonan obviously knew what his two elders were worried about. He went, "Yep." He didn't make any empty promises. He was just like he was in the past. He was an introverted and quiet child. If he could really be the same inside and out, then that would be the most gratifying result for his aunt and uncle. Okay. Everyone wash up and go to sleep. Ruewen can consider going on stage with me this weekend. Emoya stood up as well. She grabbed her guitar and stretched her back. She even waved her hands twice in passing, emitting a humming sound. Luo Shuqing couldn't find her daughter pleasing to the eye no matter how she looked at it. Going up with you to swing a sledgehammer? If we really do swing, then we'll be excellent idols. Emoya walked barefooted, giggling as she walked upstairs. She was completely unaware that her unintentional words had caused Luonan to subconsciously frown. 5 minutes later, Luonan knocked on Emoya's door. A few seconds passed before Emoya opened the door for him. She wore only a thin nightgown and her hair draped over her shoulders. She clicked her tongue twice. What a rare guest. It seems like a certain someone hasn't come to visit since he's no longer lacking in funds. That must be the reason why you ran away from home for nearly 2 months. The corner of Luonan's lips twitched as he retorted. He walked straight inside. He wasn't in the mood to joke around with Emoya. Emoya indicated for him to sit on a chair by the window. She sat on the edge of the bed with her legs bent. She casually fiddled with her hair. What's wrong? You look like you're suffering from a deep hatred. Did you hear some annoying news from your circle? You could say that. It was easy to talk with smart people. Plus, Luonan didn't have any misgivings about many things since he exposed a few of his true circumstances. He didn't need to beat around the bush. My circle is fine. But it's best to be a bit more careful when you're in your circle. There's news that to be exact, in your company there's at least one, maybe many virus carriers. HIV. It's even worse than that. Luonan extended his hand and gestured at Emoya's head. Something that can grow horns on your head, cover your body in scales, and grow a tail on your butt. Emoya was stupefied. Then she reacted. Mutant. In this era, the threat that mutants could bring about, from reality to rumors, were all sorts of assaults that disturbed people's thoughts. Emoya's reaction wasn't out of the ordinary. Luonan recalled the information he had just obtained from the branch's data. He felt that it was useless to talk about these things too much. It was most important to let Emoya clearly understand where the source of danger was. Your company has already confirmed that the infected and carrier is Ji Qiong. Of course, she's already under control. There's also a suspected case right now. We're currently tracking and controlling it. It's that excellent idol, Lan Lin. Ji Qiong? Lan Lin? Emoya pondered for a moment. A smile rippled from the corner of her lips. I have a rough idea. It seems that this virus is transmitted through sexual channels? Couldn't women be a bit more reserved these days? Luonan choked for a moment. He was a bit speechless towards Emoya's sensitivity, but he still had to say what needed to be said. It's basically like this. But we can't eliminate the possibility of other routes of transmission. I'm mainly worried about your band. They don't pay attention to their private lives. According to our intelligence, Electro-Harpies has been quite active recently. You're too close to them. You must be careful. It's best if you rest for a while. TSK. Your circle is quite professional when it comes to intelligence. It doesn't seem like you're messing around. You guys are the ones who are messing around. I don't deny it. Emoya spoke casually. She naturally straightened her toes and did a sideways stretch. It was quite normal, but her current attire and posture made the corners of Luonan's eyes twitch. Hey, I'm being serious. I'm being very serious too. You want me to be careful and keep my distance. You want me to call for help if I encounter any problems. I want to be a bit less active recently. Isn't that all? Also, do a body check. Luonan sent an address to Emoya. Make a trip here. Investigate the risks, just in case. You've thought quite thoroughly. A scholar who hasn't seen for 3 days has a whole new level of respect for you. Emoya returned to her cross-legged sitting position. Her body leaned forward slightly. Then how did you think about the matter with Rue One? Rue One? Luonan couldn't turn his train of thought for a time. What's wrong with Rue One? You arranged Rue One's grade in class. Did you pay attention to her studies or her mental state? Luonan still didn't understand. She's only been at school for a few days. Is she tired of studying? Luonan spent all day with Rue One at Acumen College. He didn't discover anything abnormal. He didn't believe that anyone could discover any changes in Rue One's mental state. The smile on Emoya's face faded. I want to ask, how can a child with only 3 to 4 years of memories keep up with the 7th grade curriculum? Luonan opened his mouth to speak, but he was unable to make a sound for a time. That's right. He knew that Rue One's relatively clear life memories were only about 3 years. At most, it wouldn't exceed 5 years. And within that time, the laboratory and the fighting arena made up nearly all of her elements. Of course this was abnormal. But Luonan knew that Quantum Corporation had installed special equipment in Rue One's brain when he rescued her from Jack's hands. It was used to control accidents. Under these circumstances, modifying and erasing memories wasn't something hard to understand. The relevant research of the Xia City branch also showed that it was practically impossible to form a complete personality with 3 to 5 years of memories. So there was reason to suspect that Rue One should have possessed a relatively mature behavior pattern early on. It was just that the relevant memories were all erased by Quantum Corporation. Rue One's current situation was formed on this basis. With Quantum Corporation's methods, the only way to find out about Rue One's past situation was to flip through their database. But there was already a slim chance of completely recovering her past memories. It was useless to tell Emoya too much about this complicated matter. Emoya's focus wasn't on this. She only has 3 to 4 years of memories, and she only has the ones from the underground fighting arena. This means that Rue One's learning foundation is practically zero. Even though she's very smart, it would be very difficult for her to catch up in a short amount of time. What's more, everyone can see that her energy and interest aren't on this. Luonan could only admit it. That's right. I don't really understand the situation in your circle. I can only ask you, do you think she'll be able to live a normal life in another 10 years with the current trend? What I mean is that she'll have a normal social circle. She'll become a complete person in society. She won't just live on a certain side. Why do I feel like you're talking about her being a gangster? Though Luonan said this, he felt quite diffident in his heart. Rue One's current abilities were more than enough to live on. But if she were to live freely in society with a complete personality, Luonan couldn't imagine such a scene for the time being. Chapter 586. Luonan came out from Emoya's room. His eyebrows were locked. He had originally come to warn Emoya. He never thought that he would end up with a head full of thoughts. He understood Emoya's intentions. This sister saw Rue One's talent in music, and wanted to bring this little girl into the profession. Luonan had to admit that Emoya had a good eye. The essence of music was organized sounds. Any sound could be summed up as the vibration of an object, and Rue One's body and soul were mixed together. Inside and outside were one. This was the highest form of vibration that Luonan could currently recognize. This realm of using simplicity to control complexity was indeed a talent that no one could reach when used in the path of music. The technical discussion could be discussed later. Luonan was thinking that rather than letting Rue One painstakingly catch up to her peers and forcefully assimilate into normal society, it would be better to display her strong points and put on a layer of disguise in the normal world. Rue One was still young. He could wait and let her decide for herself. But he thought a bit more. With Rue One's temperament, she might not be able to express her thoughts clearly even if she had them. Preparing for a rainy day wasn't wrong. Luonan thought too much. His mind was a bit muddled. Legally, Mo Haihang and Luo Shuqing were Rue One's guardians. But in reality, Luo Nan was the one who truly needed to bear the responsibility. Any decision he made could affect Rui Wen's entire life. This was real pressure, and there was no outlet for it. Perhaps only by watching Rui Wen slowly form her ideal appearance would he have the chance to breathe a sigh of relief. Luo Nan walked toward his own room. He had just taken 2 steps when he subconsciously turned his head. He saw that the door to the small room on the west side of the 2nd floor was closed. He hesitated for a moment, but he still walked over. He hesitated in front of the door for half a second. In the end, he decided not to be hypocritical. He skipped the process of knocking on the door and pushed it open to enter. This was Rui Wen's room. The room wasn't large, but it was decorated with care. It was mainly a warm and simple beige color, probably to neutralize Rui Wen's cold colors. This was the handiwork of his aunt and Moya. There was no one in the room right now, but Luo Nan didn't find it strange. He continued to walk inside. The biggest reason he chose this room for Rui Wen was that there was a small, open balcony on the west side of the 2nd floor. Rui Wen was on the balcony right now. Luo Nan entered the balcony. The first thing he saw wasn't Rui Wen, but Ink, the enormous bald crow. It hooked its claws on the edge of the balcony railing and spread its wings, making a rustling sound. It had been a long time since this guy took medicine, but under the nourishment of the closed production line, its body grew larger and larger. Its claws and wings were powerful, and its feathers were glowing. If it wasn't for its short and blunt beak, people would believe that it was an eagle when it spread its wings and flew. Yes, this small balcony of about 4 to 5 square meters was Ink's new residence, and it was the most convenient place for Rui Wen to hook up with it. Beyond Ink's half-spread wings, a crescent moon hung in the western horizon, casting down dim light that decorated this dark domain. Looking further down, he saw Rui Wen. Under Ink's wings, the girl leaned against the railing of the balcony and sat on the ground with her legs bent. Just like Emoya, she wore a thin shirt that exposed her calves and bare feet. The cold of the winter night had no effect on her. Rui Wen's eyes were closed, and she still held the practice zither in her bosom. She casually plucked the strings, and the soft and cool melody of a single note was like a breeze in the night. It brushed across Luo Nan's face, causing a wave of subtle tremors to rise on his skin. But when he carefully experienced it, it was like the rippling ripples of a river. It was so clear that the bottom could be seen, but there was a vacant emptiness within. Luo Nan could sense the regular deformations of the vibrational waves of the metal strings as they penetrated through the texture of the zither board, but he was unable to experience the part that belonged to a person under this transparent and clear tone. He was already used to this sort of Rui Wen, but Emoya's words crossed his mind. He couldn't help but have a different feeling grow in his hair. The balcony was very small. It could only fit Rui Wen by herself. Luo Nan didn't move forward. He stopped at the junction between the room and the balcony, and he half knelt in front of Rui Wen. Rui Wen must have felt Luo Nan approaching her, for she opened her eyes. Her deep and serene pupils were bottomless, and he couldn't see the emotions that a normal person should have. It was just like the sound of the zither flowing under her fingers. Luo Nan was a bit dazed when he saw these eyes. Right now Rui Wen was like the silent curtain of night outside the balcony. She was perfect like a painting, but she had completely blended into the background. There wasn't a single vivid focus. Her thoughts, hobbies, inclinations, ideals, and even her selfish desires were all buried beneath these dark pupils. Or perhaps there was simply nothing beneath them. What could be assembled from 3 or 4 years of memories? Not even a bit of it was forgotten? Jack. The underground fighting arena. The laboratory. Death. Luo Nan didn't want to think any deeper. The matter was far from being as simple as it was when he first made his decision. Perhaps Rui Wen's way of surviving in society had never been a difficult problem. It was how to let her live a high quality of life. Just like all parents hoped, to let their children live freely, happily, and with dignity. This was the crux of the problem. But could the Rue one before his eyes really do it? If she couldn't, then how should he adjust? Luonan was really a bit stupefied. He was in a daze, and Rue one just looked at him like this. Her fingers were still plucking the strings, but it was a subconscious action. Right now Rue one was like a robot doll waiting to be inputted with command. That, Luonan spoke half a sentence, and his mind became even more stuffy. His originally unformed words were completely blocked up. The void vibrated during his moment of stupor. The minute signs were like the sound of thunder from the distant sea and sky. It was very hard for ordinary people to hear, but it transmitted information from the restless lagoon. This was someone's summons, telling Luonan that he had arrived. Hurry up and fulfill the contract. The plucking stopped. Of course Rue one could feel the vibrations in the void. She had gotten used to it over the past few days, so she put down the guitar and made preparations for her next move. Ink felt the change in the atmosphere and spread its wings to fly up. The scene in the curtain of night turned from stillness to stillness, and Rue one turned from a doll to a soldier on standby. She was no longer in a daze. But was this the state that a girl should be in? Then again, what should a normal girl, no, a normal state be like for someone of the same age? It seemed that Luonan himself didn't have a set of rules. Luonan really couldn't think of what to do next. He got up in a bit of a sorry state. Yeah. Let's finish tonight's practice first. Rue one nodded slightly. Her figure turned incorporeal, and she merged into the depths of the curtain of night right before Luonan's eyes. Luonan was stupefied for a few seconds before he picked up the guitar that Rue one had tossed onto the balcony. He carried it back into the room, gently leaning against the wall as he put it down. He didn't grasp the angle of the guitar well when he put it down, and the body of the guitar collided with the wall. The guitar let out a buzzing vibration, turbid like his current mood. Half a minute later, Luonan lay on the bed in his room. He closed his eyes, and his terrible mood slowly settled down. What replaced it was a clarity and calmness that gradually approached instinct. Luonan's mind broke through the cage, piercing through the turbid mental region of the public. He entered the lagoon, a similarly chaotic and even more berserk domain. In the lagoon, the power structure that came from Ghost Eye was like a shining lighthouse amidst a violent storm. It marked the position and depth of extraordinaries, and it issued a provocation to Luonan. Come. Let's fight another 300 rounds. After the 14th lecture ended, Ghost Eye Che displayed his specialty in being shameless. He claimed to have lost the wager and willingly stayed in Xia City to serve as Luonan's sparring partner. She wanted to squeeze out elements that could be used by Luonan from the cage theory that Luonan had elucidated and put into practice. She wanted to improve her own foundation and seek a new breakthrough. This was the judgment of Her Majesty Empress Wu. There was a 70 to 80% chance that it was true. For an extraordinary to cast aside his pride, there really weren't many people in this world who could do anything to him. Ghost Eye stayed in Xia City as he wished. In the outer seas, he trained with Luonan in the lagoon every night. No matter what his intentions were, Luonan needed a sparring partner like this. He needed it more than anyone could imagine. Luonan didn't immediately step forward to meet Ghost Eye's provocation. Instead, he calibrated his position and locked onto the depths of this chaotic storm zone. There was another target drifting erratically, and he poured the strength of his mind into it. A rigid barrier towered in an instant, and the impact of the storm was greatly reduced. Luonan entered the fortress constructed by the configuration of the Ring of Blood Intent. This structure was still simple and crude. It was the standard big, stupid, and thick. Compared to Ghost Eye's extraordinary domain that spanned across the storm, it was quite lacking. But it was this kind of structure that formed the necessary foundation for Luonan's assault on the lagoon region. It was like a ship. It could carry a crew, and it could travel amidst the howling winds and huge wave. As Luonan's telepathy entered the fortress, The 100 or so telepathic thoughts that had been rather quiet within the area surrounding the fortress quickly became restless. The corresponding information was sprinkled to every corner of Xia City through the psychic wave network and a few other channels. In the blink of an eye, telepathic thoughts gathered one after another from every region of Xia City. Most of them were transferred through the psychic wave network. There were also a few who came through the bracelet that Luonan had distributed 2 days ago. In any case, the number of telepathic thoughts that came from different people within the fortress broke through the 500 mark in a short dozen seconds. This was pretty much the total number of ability users who could enter the fortress through the configuration of the Ring of Blood Intent after lesson number 14. Due to the pressure of the lagoon region's storm and the limitations of the extremely simple configuration, a considerable portion of ability users had their consciousness in a half-muddled state after entering the fortress. It was very difficult for them to communicate with others. They only retained their basic perception abilities. Only a few B-rank mental users, such as Gao Meng and Bamboo Pole, could maintain the flow of telepathic thoughts to communicate. But no one was chatting with Luonan at this time. For the 500 ability users within the fortress, every second in the lagoon region was incomparably precious. And Luonan and Ghost Eye's attack drill was a carnival that belonged only to them. That's right. This was a carnival. Luonan borrowed the strength of the fortress to blast Ghost Eye with his first shot. He pushed against the energy turbulence of the lagoon region, transmitting the destructive shock several dozen kilometers away. Chapter 587. The revelry didn't last too long. Approximately 30 minutes later, the supernatural attack from Ghost Eye above the abyss region was like the receding tide of seawater. It receded layer by layer until it was far beyond the limits of human perception. At the same time, Luonan, who was leading the operation of the fort, had his spirited aura vanish into the void. It was indistinct and undetectable. The evening demonstration ended here. Some of the ability users within the fort withdrew their consciousnesses. Some wanted to stay for a while longer. It was fine even if they just wanted to experience the feeling of the abyss region. As for the latter, they only needed around 100 people to barely support the fort. If they had less than this number, they could only go back to their homes and find their own mothers. Speaking of which, the standard of 100 people was nothing. For the ability users who were fortunate enough to participate in this matter, most of them were able to experience the magnificence of the abyss region in advance with a C-rank standard. They could ponder over the marvels of their own domain. Such a good thing was something they didn't even dare to dream of 5 days ago. It was only within the boundaries of Xia City that Teacher Luo was keeping watch. It was only because of the incomparably marvelous Ring of Blood that they were able to construct this fort. That they had this opportunity. At this very moment, the ability users of the Xia City branch, of course, were the lucky ones who participated in number 14 Luonan's lecture. They were the targets of envy, jealousy, and gnashing of teeth from the entire world. Just this sense of superiority was enough to bestow them with powerful motivation. Even though Luonan's bracelet had yet to be popularized, the cost of using the SVAP model of the psychic wave network was not cheap. The ability users of Xia City still relied on their surging enthusiasm to continue the operation of the fort until the latter half of the night. Only when most people were exhausted of energy and were forcefully kicked out of the psychic wave network did the fort stop. Early in the morning, the cold air and the morning mist of the seaside mingled together and swept through the city. The neon lights of the business district still illuminated the city's sky. A certain person who persisted to the end left a message on the forums of headquarters. I pulled an all-nighter in the fort again. I'm so tired. Then he fell into a sweet dream amidst the howls of Kill Xiache that filled the mountains and plains. He had no reaction to the sound of cars that gradually grew denser outside the window. A commercial vehicle that had been parked in the residential district for half the night started up and slowly drove out. The car itself was very ordinary, but the interior of the car was completely modified according to the layout of a high-end business car. Other than the driver's seat in the front, the middle and rear parts were completely open, with only 2 seats side by side, suitable for sitting or lying. The main color of the carriage was dark red. Most people were not used to this color, but the 2 people in the carriage were already used to this environment. Enlu wore a suit with her legs together as she sat on the right seat, looking like a white-collared office worker. Her amber glasses couldn't conceal her beauty, but it changed her temperament a little. She operated the car's audiovisual system to display the updated electronic chart and said softly, "We've already conducted 2 rounds of observation on the targets recommended by Multifaceted. From the looks of it, he was indeed able to enter the abyss and carry out his consciousness activities. But the range is very limited, just like the devout believers of the Order who have received the installation of the Sanguine Flame's willpower, they have ascended for a short period of time." Madame Halder gave the final answer. After a month, the leader of the Sanguine Order had once again set foot in the territory of Xia City. Right now, she was sitting on the left-hand side of the seat. Her face was expressionless, but she stuck out her pinky out of habit. Her blood-red fingernail lightly scratched the old wound on her cheek, feeling the slight itch and pain. Enlu blinked her eyes behind her glasses. Even though Madame Halder was the first to blade him, what she said just now was a bit out of line. She lacked reverence for the Sanguine Flame's willpower. She was too close to the control faction. However, Enlu didn't say anything. She continued to analyze the information, corroborating with Madame Halder's opinion. The car drove out of the residential district and followed the flow of traffic through the city of Xia City. Approximately 10 minutes later, in between reports, Enlu looked out the window and said softly, "The central station is up ahead." Madame Halder also shot a glance out the window. She didn't say anything, but she took over the control of the audiovisual system. She cut off the chart and replaced it with an image from the surveillance system of Xia City. The date was the night of the 14th of this month. The image had already been processed to mark out a special existence within the flow of people. Actually, even without the marking, Madame Halder and Enlu could quickly identify the target. They were all too familiar with the figure's back, including the clothes. Enlu promptly switched to the main topic. "We're still checking the surveillance system of the station, but the target should be avoiding the cameras on purpose. We haven't found any valuable clues for now." She stumbled a bit, but in the end, she still chose the neutral word, target. Madame Halder didn't open her mouth from beginning to end. She just replayed the surveillance image over and over, all the way until the car passed through the city and arrived at a shipyard on the eastern coast of Xia City. This shipyard was the property of Xia City's City Defense Army. There was a sentry every few steps. The security was tight. But when Madame Halder's business car drove out of the security zone, there were already military guides waiting for them. They brought them into the factory. The road was green, and they passed unimpeded. Enlu sighed in her heart. The Blood Flame Order had always maintained a relatively close cooperative relationship with the military. Even though Tianbang had relied on the resources of Team AB and the field army to catch them unprepared, the Order's deep-rooted network of relationships in Xia City for dozens of years had not completely collapsed. However, this network of relationships was like a rootless duckweed. Even a high-level member of the Order like Enlu found it hard to accurately estimate how much longer it could last. The car drove all the way to a certain shipyard by the sea. This was originally a spare factory for assembling coastal warships. Most of the equipment here had already been discontinued. They only borrowed the special environment of the shipyard to store a special creation that was hauled back from the sea. Madame Halder and Enlu got out of the car one after another. They only needed to raise their eyes to see the ash-gray hill floating in the sea below the shipyard. This hill was 15 meters high above the water's surface. Its complete volume was enormous, and its main structure was pieced together from all sorts of skeletal fragments. These bones were mostly fish bones, but they were abnormally tough. It was clear that they were the remains of a mutant. The method of piecing them together was very crude. Sharp spikes could be seen everywhere. If someone were to bump into it, there was a high chance that they would be pierced through by 10,000 arrows. This hill was the most obvious trace of the sea region where Jean Tong had either disappeared or died half a month ago. It was still a ghastly white in the video data. As time passed, the bones continued to change color. But in any case, it looked rather strange and frightening. Inlo had just sized it up a few times when someone called her. She swept her eyes over the number and immediately took 2 quick steps forward. She moved closer to Madame Halder's ear and said, "Sky General Entertainment. They're most likely here to discuss an acquisition." Madame Halder stared at the hill of bones. She simply waved her hand and walked forward. Inlo understood. She stopped where she was and spoke a few words with Madame Halder. After all, this wasn't a good time to negotiate. She simply set an appointment and hung up the phone. When she turned her head to look, Madame Halder was already being led by a military guide onto the workbench of the shipyard. She turned to the other side of the hill of bones. Inlo sped up, wanting to catch up to Madame Halder. But as soon as she stepped onto the workbench and turned a corner, she saw a rather familiar skinny face. That person happened to be blocking Madame Halder's path and was smiling as he spoke. When Inlo came over, his eyes lit up when he saw her dressed like an office lady. He winked at her and said, "Oh my, your order is always shouting about fighting and killing, but you never lack beauties. This person isn't inferior to you back then." Inlo opened her mouth, but a breath was stuck in her throat. She almost couldn't make a sound. It wasn't easy for her to catch her breath. She couldn't care about anything else. She immediately closed her legs and bowed. "Lord Ghostai, why do you say I'm interested in meeting your order? That's a really cool way to address you." Ghostai was wearing a loose casual outfit and a pair of sneakers. He looked like an old morning jogger. He had a smile on his face and didn't look the slightest bit dignified as an extraordinary. But Inlo, who was right next to him, had a layer of cold sweat on her back. She had discussed with the military about a secret visit, but she just had to run into an extraordinary. Was this an accident, or was it something else? Compared to the uncouth Ghostai, Madame Halder was wearing a light gray retro windbreaker, a pair of goatskin gloves, and a silk scarf around her neck. She looked like a strong woman inspecting her own business, and she was indeed calm. "Brother Che, you worked hard last night and came ashore early in the morning. Why are you here? Oh my, are you trying to make me do my best?" Ghostai was still as uncouth as ever. He laughed and said, "I'm just joking. I'm just joking. Actually, I've been restraining myself lately. It's just that my neck has been cold. It's not very comfortable, so I decided to take advantage of the fresh air in the morning and go for a stroll. You don't believe me? If you don't believe me, you can come over and touch it." Ghostai's words were already quite unreliable, but Madame Halder actually took off her goatskin gloves and touched Ghostai's neck. She had a faint smile on her face. "Your skin is warm. You don't feel too cold, or perhaps your meridians are blocked." Ghostai snorted. "You're a Western woman with a high nose and deep eyes. Why are you talking to me about meridians? It's not that kind of feeling. It's like a blade being pressed against the back of my head. It's cold and sinister. TSK. It's not as comfortable as your little hand." Madame Halder ignored Ghostai's last words. She withdrew her hand and put on her gloves once more. She played down the situation and said, "A blade pressed against the back of my neck. A murderous aura. Xia City has a free sparring partner like you. It's simply a business without any capital. Is there anyone who's dissatisfied with you?" Chapter 588. Madame Halder and Ghostai sat on the workbench in the shipyard. It was as if they were talking in riddles, or as if they were old friends exchanging greetings. They did not exchange many words, and then, with smiles on their faces, they walked away, one going up, the other going down, and did not meet again. Enla followed behind Madame Halder. Aside from the initial greeting, she didn't say a word. She only knew that the two of them were talking about last night's drill in the Abyss area, but she couldn't guess the specifics. But what she could be sure of was that Madame Halder and Ghost Eye must have reached some sort of tacit understanding. Otherwise, why would they have to create a coincidental encounter in this military base for others to see when and where they could talk about such gossip? Enla lowered her eyes. A month ago, she was only one of the 2 deputy officiants in the order. But now that the traitor, Ren Hong, was dead, she was undoubtedly the first in line to inherit the position of officiant. Her position in the order had risen to an unprecedented height. But when did Madame Halder and Ghost Eye get in touch? The two of them had such a close friendship. But no matter what kind of difficult situation they were in, Madame Halder never revealed anything. Why was that? Enla had a subtle feeling in her heart, but no matter what, the benefits were immediate. No matter how dire the blood flame order was, having an extraordinaire appear and communicate with them in a friendly manner was an excellent card to play. The guiding personnel of the military were dumbfounded at this moment. To him, this was undoubtedly a very important piece of information. And when this information was sent to the military decision-makers, it would probably boost the blood flame order, which was currently in a rather passive position in D-City. Enla pondered over this in her heart, but since Madame Halder didn't say anything, she couldn't ask. A minute later, Ghost Eye, who had finished circling around the white bone mound, did not even say goodbye and just left. She finally calmed down and carefully observed the white bone hill that was right in front of her. In fact, the higher-ups of the blood flame order had already analyzed the white bone mound from all sorts of images and information. This time, they were seeing the real thing in person to verify their previous analysis. Enla soon confirmed that 99% of the White Bone Hill's structure was based on the Blood Soul Temple. As for the remaining 10%, it was just a deviation caused by the impact of the energy. Most importantly, even though it had been half a month, he could still vaguely feel the special spiritual waves radiating from it. Outsiders wouldn't be able to guess, but as the deputy officiant, Enla could tell at a glance that during the process of shaping the White Bone Hill, there had been an astonishing energy exchange. Within the church, this energy exchange was also called blood sacrifice. How could such a thing and such a form appear in the sea where Jean Tong disappeared or died? Could it be that it was really as some people had guessed, that the one who had already died in battle at the Aurora Cloud capital had revived using a secret technique? Enla did not voice out such a taboo guess. She remained silent until Mrs. Halder signaled for them to leave. Under the more cautious and respectful welcome of the military guides, the two of them got back into the MPV and drove out of the factory. In the car, Madame Halder had been resting with her eyes closed, or perhaps she was deep in thought. Only when they reached the highway did she open her eyes and speak. Luo Nan wants to kill someone. Enla was suddenly stupefied. Her thoughts had been swaying between the White Bone Hill and Ghost Eye. She hadn't thought of Teacher Luo, whose name had already shaken the world even though he hadn't reached adulthood. She was a bit stupefied for a time. Luckily, she quickly came to her senses. Madame Halder and Ghost Eye had mentioned the drill in the Abyss region earlier. Luo Nan was the core character. But the matter of killing someone. Madam, who do you think Luo Nan wants to kill? Madame Halder took off her kid leather gloves and placed them on the armrest of her seat. Her right hand, which had just caressed the back of Ghost Eye's neck, opened and closed twice. She spoke a few seconds later. According to Ghost Eye's explanation, Luo Nan is using the drill in name to familiarize himself with the attack patterns of the Abyss region. In reality, he's using Ghost Eye as a simulated target. Since he's using Ghost Eye as a simulated target, it's very likely that the target is a mental type extraordinary. Enla was speechless. She said after a while, even if he's practiced 100 or 1,000 times, he'll still kill extraordinaries as he pleases. Her voice suddenly cut off. Enla thought of Jean Tong at this moment. Madame Halder's gaze stared at her own right hand. She muttered, "Ghost eye means that he can faintly sense a certain hidden threat. Perhaps that threat is Luonan's trump card in beheading Jean Tong. But Jean Tong is a fleshly type after all. It's very hard to completely imitate his previous experience. That's why he needs Ghost Eye as a live target. There are only 30 or 40 mental type extraordinaries under the heavens. Who could it be?" Inlo didn't speak. She was still digesting Halder's judgment. Even though the logic was complete, it was still very hard for her to completely agree with it. Madame Halder didn't dwell too much on this matter. She most likely wanted to gather more information before making a judgment. However, she made a decision. Notify Sky General Entertainment. Let's shelve the negotiations over Mingtang Culture's acquisition. Madam? According to Multifaceted's explanation, Luonan and Mingtang Culture have quite a deep connection. We need to have a channel to facilitate contact. Inlu responded with a yes and immediately made a call to the negotiating side. She didn't care how astonished and angry the other side was. The matter was settled in less than a minute. When the call ended, Inlu was just about to ask for instructions when Madame Halder took the initiative to ask her, "What do you think about Ghost Eye?" Inlu was a bit startled. She didn't know what to say for a time. She simply shook her head. "I haven't studied him in depth before. I don't dare to make a rash judgment." Madame Halder laughed soundlessly. She didn't bicker with Inlo. She continued, "Ghost Eye seems to be frivolous, but he has everything an extraordinary should have. His judgment far surpasses that of a normal person. That's fine. When it comes to extraordinary cultivation, he's far more curious than the vast majority of extraordinaries. Correspondingly, he doesn't pay much attention to mundane matters. You need to remember this." Inli's heartbeat increased by a knot. There was no doubt that Madame Halder was deciphering the mysteries of Ghost Eye's relationship with her. To the Blood Flame Order, which lacked a core of extraordinaries and a sacrificial artifact to suppress them, this was an extremely important resource. Regardless of whether it was sooner or later, if she could learn the truth, it meant that Li's position within the Order and in Madame Halder's heart had been further solidified. Inlo felt as if she had returned to the time when she received the Order's fundamental secret technique. She listened attentively to Madame Halder's every word and committed them to memory. There wasn't much information regarding Ghost Eye. It was nothing more than contact information, communication skills, personality analysis, and so on. Madame Halder only took 2 minutes to finish explaining everything. In the end, she sighed with emotion. Ghost Eye is the kind of person whose curiosity is greater than his ambition. He likes to meddle in other people's business and care about old relationship. Out of all the extraordinaries, he's practically the most suitable to befriend and rely on. It's just that the more favors are used, the thinner they are. In recent years, I've needed him, but he hasn't needed me. Our friendship of 20 years can only withstand 2 or 3 troubles. If it goes any further, it'll most likely not last. Inlo consoled. If we can get past this hurdle, the Order will be promoted, and our status will be close. Perhaps, don't say these meaningless words. Madame Halder waved her hand. Rather than thinking about these useless things, it's better to think about how to clean up the loose ends in Xia City and open up the situation in T City. Inlo choked up. She responded with a soft yes. She couldn't continue for a time. The difficulties faced by the church after the relocation of their foundation had far exceeded their worst expectations. It had to be said that T City was an important city in the Pacific Ocean. Although it was far away from the major economic circles and was isolated overseas, it and Chan City were like horns to each other. They faced each other from a distance and just so happened to be 2 important strategic strongholds protecting the deep blue world. It was also one of the core offices of the current world government. The strategic location was admittedly good, but it was also a place where wind, clouds, dragons, and tigers converged. The government, the military, the capital, and the powers of the inner world intersected. For an outsider like the Bloodflame Order, it was far too difficult to take root there. Madame Halder had always viewed T-City as an important backup base for the past decade or so. She had transferred many industries there, and had a legal and reliable identity. But this could only guarantee their ability to survive in normal society. In the inner world, where power and foundation were valued, the Bloodflame Order was a secret order. Their foundation of believers was in a half-collapsed state. They were like rootless duckweed. If this was all, they could still immerse themselves in business and slowly plan. But they never expected that at this critical time, Chan City, which was supposed to be the most stable, would stir up trouble. The impact spread to T-City as well. Gradually there was chaos. Lu understood that under these complicated circumstances, Madame Halder had put down the multitudes of affairs in T-City and returned to Xia City. Aside from dealing with the loose ends of moving out of Xia City, there was also a large part of it. Madame Halder saw that the situation in T-City was difficult and hoped to find some external power that she could borrow. Right now, Madame Halder had found Ghost Eye, but this wasn't enough. Several minutes of oppressive silence persisted in the commercial vehicle until news from the outside came in. Lu received the latest intelligence from the Pacific Ocean. Calling it intelligence was a bit of a stretch. The news had just been released when it became the most explosive news in the inner world. The Ability User Headquarters and the Order of Justice have put aside their negotiations, but they immediately announced the news of a new plane to the outside world. Confirmed? What's the specific location? Lu felt a bit bitter in her mouth. Confirmed, but there's no specific location. We only suspect that it might be a subsidiary plane of the Deep Blue World. Madame Halder was silent. Lu paused. In the end, she couldn't help but speak again. T-City is definitely within the exploration radius. According to the official exploration principles, the recruitment of personnel is imperative. There's also the expulsion and counterattack of the mutant species. Madam, our manpower and reserves can't afford to be tossed about. Chapter 589. Tomorrow was the winter solstice. It was the time of year when the night was the longest. The weather in Xia City hadn't been too good for some time now. At 5 o'clock in the evening, the sky had clearly darkened. Shadows flickered in the depths of the jungle on the north bank. Add to that the sharp or coarse caws of the resident birds. Those who were a bit less courageous might not have the guts to walk on the forest path. However, inside the gear building in the jungle, the public activity area on the second floor of the basement was brightly lit. Due to the lighting, the side of the waterway near the sandbar attracted quite a few fish and shrimps from the bottom of the lake. They stuck close to the glass wall and bumped into each other. As for whether it was interesting or strange, that would depend on the aesthetic of each person. None of the people who stayed here paid attention to this scenery. They sat around the bar counter, laughing and joking. The atmosphere was lively. Aha, serves you right. Shuelei drank a bit of alcohol. Since he wasn't of legal drinking age, he lacked experience in this area. It was inevitable that he would get a bit drunk. Of course, the most important thing was that the difficulty of the winter solstice challenge had silently melted away. A large chunk of his mind had been swept away, and his bold and cheerful vigor had returned to his body. His voice grew increasingly resonant. This is what happens when you want to eat alone. Let's not talk about what happens over there. Big bro, I am going to enjoy the profits from inside. The one who was grabbing Shuelei's shoulder was the CMO of Heavenly Crystal Biology R&D Company, Director Xie Junping. Shuelei's face was already red from the alcohol. This marketing director, who had been in office for a month, was the one whose face was truly flushed red. His face could practically light up half the bar counter. Haven't you seen the energy sector these past 2 days? It's been going straight up and down without any twists and turns. Getting a sum of money at this time is an extreme operation. Intelligence, decisiveness, ability, and luck are all indispensable. Or should I say, ever since I got to know you guys, my luck has been off the charts. Those people from headquarters are courting death. They actually wanted to hide this sort of thing, and they weren't able to hide it. Shuele was already an outstanding member of the Xia City branch. His standpoint was extremely upright. He didn't hesitate in the slightest when he opened fire. Not many people knew about the storm that had suddenly arisen on the other side of the Pacific Ocean. The intelligence obtained by the Xia City branch only showed that Chan City's ability user headquarters and the Order of Justice had discovered a plane similar to the Deep Blue World for some unknown reason. It was said that the two sides were originally preparing to develop it in secret, but during the course of negotiations, such an important secret matter was inexplicably leaked. This sneak attack left both the ability user headquarters and the Order of Justice in a rather sorry state. Not only did they have to deal with the inquiries of various powers over the past 2 days, they also had to question the other party's ability to keep secrets and even their most fundamental attitude. It was said that after the leak, the high-level talks between the two sides had ended on bad terms many times, and now the negotiations had been put on hold indefinitely, but the impact caused was hard to clean up. At first, everyone was a little confused, not sure if it was a fact or a rumor. Later on, even more detailed information was released, and there was even a piece of extremely critical and deadly information, such as, the party involved does not have the exact coordinates. At this moment, everyone finally came back to their senses. You two haven't even figured out the situation yet, and you've already scratched each other's faces until they're covered in blood. It would be a waste not to see a joke, and it would be a waste not to take advantage. At that moment, the big and small investors all entered the market. Regardless of whether they could catch any fish or not, they had to muddy the waters first. The turmoil in the global stock market was just one side of it. Xie Jinping, who was an outsider, had already taken the opportunity to take a bite out of it. Satisfied, he left to watch the show. But there were even more major forces and individual gamblers who were determined to be addicted to gambling for the rest of their lives. They were eager to get a few more pieces of meat on the Pacific Ocean, in the new dimension whose coordinates had yet to be determined. It's rare to be so free. Qin Ikuan, who had been diligently performing his duty, still didn't touch a drop of alcohol tonight, but he couldn't help but sigh at this moment. It must be said that Xia City had been in a state of chaos since the end of September. People from all walks of life rushed in and out of the city. They set up a stage to sing an opera. They tossed and turned with all their might. Now the tables had turned. Whether it was headquarters or the Order of Justice, they had both fallen head first into the maelstrom. From the perspective of the people of the Xia City branch, such a situation was truly like a cold drink in the summer and a hot pot in the winter. It was a comfortable situation. He reached for the ice water in front of him. At this moment, Cat Eyes, who was temporarily acting as the bartender, called out from behind the counter. "Jerry!" With a whoosh, a fat brown figure leaped through the gap between Qin Ikuan's arm and the counter. It came to a screeching halt when it reached Cat Eyes. It stopped right in front of a cup of fruit juice that had just been concocted. It was a muskrat. Its iconic long tail was swinging on the table. Its tail was nearly 20 centimeters long. It was taller than the cup when it squatted normally. Since its head was small and its body was large, and there was no clear dividing line between the two, it looked quite fat. But among its kind, this size was still considered underage. It was already very close to Xie Jinping and Xie Jinping. Xie Jinping was especially startled by it. But when Xie Jinping turned his head and saw the big fat fellow in front of him, not only was he not annoyed, he laughed out loud instead. "See? I told you that this little fellow isn't an ordinary creature. I was screwed over by it back then." As he spoke, he reached out to touch it. However, the muskrat, who had been named Jerry, still maintained an extremely high level of vigilance. It twisted its body and circled to the other side of the cup. It even revealed its sharp incisors at Xie Junping. Tisich narrow-minded. Xie Junping still wanted to tease this little fellow, but Cat Eyes had already given him an order. Send it to your mother. As Cat Eyes spoke, she gestured with her hands and pointed at the end of the counter where Rue One was sitting silently by herself. Jerry's flat head twisted back and forth twice, and its tail swung along with it. In the end, it actually lowered its body. Its front claws hooked onto the joint between the stem and the base of the cup. Its fat belly stuck to the table, and its long webbed hind legs exerted force. It advanced with difficulty towards Rue One in a nearly gliding manner. Its appearance was enough to make one howl. If Shuelei had not pulled him back in time, Xie Junping really would have rolled over in laughter. This wasn't the first time Qin Yikuan had seen such a situation, but he still could not help but click his tongue in wonder. This isn't the intelligence a muskrat can have. Are you sure there aren't any abnormalities? The laboratory didn't find anything. Besides, as long as Rue One likes it, what problems could there be? What logic? Qin Yikuan was dumbstruck and speechless. The feeling faction and the reasoning faction couldn't be said together no matter what. At this time, a call came through. After Qin Yikuan took the call, he said a few words and then stood up. He turned his head and said, "Leister, help me move a few things." Shuelei stood up. Xie Junping was not to be outdone. He swayed as he stood up, raised his hand and said, "I'll help too." Qin Yikuan swept a glance at Xie Junping's physique. He didn't hold too much hope towards the results of this short month of training, but he still gave him a bit of face. He laughed and said, "2 people is enough. We'll be back soon." He pulled Shuelei and rode the elevator up. Xie Junping was still a bit drunk. He was distracted for a moment and didn't follow. He could only sit down resentfully as he watched the elevator close. But when he turned his head, he saw Cat Eyes concentrating on mixing drink. Rue One and Jerry were also in their own country. They didn't seem to care about anyone else. He felt that it was boring. He was also a bit scared. It was true that he liked beautiful women. Disregarding Rue One, Cat Eyes' image was very much his cup of tea. But the more he came into contact with the inner world, the more he understood the depths of it. It was best for him to stay as far away from such dangerous people as possible. Xie Junping simply got up again. He waited for the next elevator and went up as well. It was all right on the second underground floor, but when he reached the entrance hall of the first floor, the cold wind of the winter night blew, and he couldn't hold on much longer. Finally, he still had a bit of reason left. He rushed to the edge of the small plaza in front of the door and vomited into the underbrush. Afterwards, his condition was much better. The strict training he had undergone during this period of time also showed result. He only wore a thin sweater and stood outside, but he didn't feel that cold. He surveyed his surroundings and borrowed the light from the door to illuminate the area. He could actually faintly see the depth of the jungle 6 to 7 meters in front of him. Even though it was still hazy, there were only 2 living things in that area, a bird and a beast. Neither of them could escape his senses. According to Dean Wan's words, he was already able to synthesize sound waves, smell, heat radiation, and many other perceptual differences. He was able to distinguish living things from the surrounding environment. According to the inner world's terms, this was spiritual sense. At this step, even though it was far from being an awakening, it could be said that he possessed a certain amount of extraordinary strength. Xie Junping could even barely tell that the bird that was slightly moving up and down on the branch was a crow. Of course, it was far inferior to ink. It seemed that his spiritual sense had improved again in the past 2 days. It was really smooth sailing. Yay! Xie Junping clenched his fists and jumped a few times in the cold wind to vent the excitement in his heart. Perhaps because his movements were too large, the crow at the edge of the forest tilted its head, as if it was sizing him up. Xie Junping whistled at the crow, but it didn't respond. Instead, at the end of the forest path on the other side of the plaza, Shui Lei's voice rang out. "Hey, why are you outside?" "I wanted to help, but I didn't expect you to run so fast," Xie Zhuping complained half-truthfully, but the next moment, he saw the sturdy and heavy metal box on Shui Lei and Qin Ikuan's shoulders that was half the height of a person. The rest of his words turned into a strange cry. F***ck me. This isn't grass, it's a precision component that's about to be destroyed by our teacher Luo. I think his credit limit must be in the negatives again. That's not necessarily the case. The SVIP model usage fee is still quite considerable. Lazy, you put on the bracelet at the first moment. It's inevitable that a full man doesn't know the hunger of a hungry man. Qin Ikuan unloaded the box that weighed several hundred kilograms from his shoulder like he was taking off his school bag, and placed it in the hall. Only then did the box's load-bearing pulley come into play. Shui Lei did as he was told. Xie Zhuping came over and curiously touched the outer shell of the box, but he couldn't tell what it was. Chapter 590. No one took a crow that could be seen everywhere seriously. Xie Zhuping and the other two walked into the hall. The boxes weighing hundreds of kilograms made muffled sounds like thunder as they stepped on the ground. This is our teacher Luo. From Shui Lei's perspective, this bit of weight was nothing. But he had a problem with Luo Nan's way of doing things these past few days. It wasn't easy for me to get into the basics of Sansho. I've been messing up my schedule these past few days. I can't leave the front door. I can't take a step out of the back door. I'm probably going to slip down again, Xie Zhuping chuckled. He's reverting to his old ways. Didn't you say that he used to be like this? Qin Ikuan pressed the button to open the elevator and sent the box inside. After turning around, he also joined in on the conversation. Of course, he was mostly explaining. Mr. Luo is also striking while the iron is hot. After all, with such an impressive result like the Ring of Blood and Will, and with Ghost Eye as a sparring partner, this is a rare opportunity that cannot be missed. Shui Lei displayed his stance. He fiddles with these exoskeletons every day just to strike while the iron is hot? Qin Ikuan smiled and asked Shui Lei to move the other box into the elevator. At the same time, he raised his hand and shook it, showing the rather heavy metal bracelet on his wrist. This is also the result. As a physical body, I thought that I would never be able to touch the abyss in my life. I didn't expect Mr. Luo to be able to solve this problem so easily. This thing is now very popular. Shui Lei subconsciously shook his wrist. The weight on his wrist made him lose the confidence to continue speaking. He could only mutter, "Body and soul should be balanced." Such a good aptitude. Beep beep beep. The alarm of the elevator rang. After all, it was not a freight elevator. 2 metal boxes had actually exceeded the limit of 1,300 kilograms. All right, I'll use the one next to it. Shui Lei struggled to pull the box out again. At that moment, a call came through. Xie Zhuping helped him press the button. "I'll go this way too. B6, right?" After much difficulty, the elevator doors closed and the car descended. Shui Lei was on the phone the whole time. He hummed repeatedly and occasionally said words like Christmas or New Year's Day. By the time the elevator arrived, he still hadn't finished speaking. Xie Zhuping then helped Shui Lei pull out the box. At this time, Qin Ikuan was already waiting outside. He was swiping his authority, which was to verify his identity. Xie Zhuping felt a toothache when he saw this scene. A good portion of Gear's 7 basement floors were remodeled by Yen Hong during this period. Because he had always been engaged in highly classified research on the archetype format and the burners, these underground buildings had practically been transformed into a heavily guarded fortress by him. When Xie Zhuping and Luo Nan first came here, they suffered a loss due to the issue of authority. Whether it was him or Luo Nan, neither of them liked this sort of arrangement. They simply abandoned most of the defense systems when they took over. However, Luo Nan had clashed with headquarters last time, and gear had been severely damaged by headquarters tank and the others. They had no choice but to consider the issue of safety when they repaired it. Plus, Luonan had been using gear as a base for research these past few days. The corresponding defensive measures were reinforced layer by layer. This was especially true for the 6th floor, which was the main laboratory. The 7th floor, which contained the mainframe database, energy station, and other core installations, had already been built into a small fortress by the technical staff of the Xia City branch. It was said that according to these safety standards, even if an extraordinaire were to charge over, these 2 layers of the fortress would be able to hold out for 1 to 2 minutes. This was enough time for the Xia City branch to take the next step in providing reinforcements. Safety and convenience could not be balanced at the same time. The higher the safety factor, the lower the comfort factor. The 2 boxes of equipment parts were actually much simpler here. They were directly sent through a conveyor belt to the laboratory's warehouse for classification and inspection. The 3 of them just had to go through the inspection procedure step by step. They're really looking for trouble. Xie Junping had the authority to enter the laboratory, but he was seriously impatient with the complicated inspection process. At this time, he heard Shuelei say, "The troublemakers are in the back." Tianqi just called. He said that he couldn't get in touch with Nanster. He asked me to tell him that the Mystic Arts Research Society is going to conduct an end-of-year activity. They're going to organize a Mystic Arts theme week during Christmas and New Year's. The venue is set to be at Gear. According to Tianqi, this should be a warm-up for the next semester's relocation. They want to take advantage of this opportunity to move some equipment over. All the functions that can be used have been activated, and the activity space has been expanded. F***CK. Why are these people causing trouble? Xie Junping raised his wrist. He wanted to make a phone call and clarify the situation. However, he didn't have the authority to communicate on the 6th floor. He couldn't make the call at all. Shuelei advised, "It's hard to say even if we get in touch. After all, this isn't Nanster's private property. The property belongs to the Mystic Arts Research Society. We can't say anything about when they move and how they move." As he spoke, Shuelei turned to look at the brand-new security equipment around them. Maybe Nanster needs to find another workshop. There's definitely room for discussion here. As the person directly responsible for Luonan's security, Qin Yikuan's tone was calm and certain. He didn't feel that this was a problem. Xie Junping went, Only now did he remember that Luonan had the Xia City branch behind him. If he were to put on a show and discuss with the Mystic Arts Research Society, the latter might not have any leeway to refuse. Levels. It was all a matter of levels. He also felt that this wasn't a big deal. It just so happened that the 3 of them had already passed their authority verification. He casually spat out, "Speaking of which, a workshop? Are you sure it's not a factory?" The 3 of them walked inside amidst their laughter. They passed through 2 more security gates before entering the core area of the laboratory. Upon entering, they discovered that behind the unfriendly and serious face of this laboratory was just a young and inexperienced rookie. The entire floor was completely empty. Not a single person could be seen. There were only a few multifunctional robots driving motors and carrying equipment. They buzzed through the corridors and the passageways on both sides. Even with the Xia City branch's vigorous support, the installation of various equipment was far from complete. Many spaces were still empty, or perhaps only a small portion of them had been completed. The only places that were truly in use were the warehouse where the 2 boxes of components were stored, as well as Luonan's current workspace. This wasn't the first time the 3 of them had come here. They walked inside with familiarity. Soon, they saw Luonan's figure at the end of the passageway on the right. However, this young genius who was famous for his mental senses didn't seem to have discovered their arrival. Luonan was standing in the middle of a pile of mechanical arms. He held an electronic pen in his hand and drew in the middle of the work area. Following his movements, a small portion of the dozen or so mechanical arms that were distributed within the space of over 100 square meters were flexing and moving. Each of them had a different division of labor. Some of them were moving equipment. Some of them were assembling and dismantling component. Some of them were even brazenly welding. It caused sparks to flicker within the work area. Qin Yikuan and the others watched with twitching eyelids. Xie Zhuping was a bit stupefied. Does he really want to use this place as a factory? Xue Lei turned his head to look all around. How come I don't see Worker Zhai? Qin Yikuan answered, Worker Zhai is working overtime today. He didn't come. Xue Lei turned his head in shock. He nearly twisted his neck. Hey, is he operating it by himself? Qin Yikuan grinned. There's a military-grade AI here. According to Worker Zhai, it's quite easy to use. It should be. It felt fine when I came over in the afternoon. Then the afternoon ended up like this? The corners of Xue Lei's eyes twitched. He stared fixedly at the figure within the forest of mechanical arms. He confirmed that there was no immediate danger before sweeping a glance at the clock to the side. The clock showed that Luo Nan had been working continuously for 7 hours. In other words, he had skipped at least half of this morning's classes. He's really gone mad. Speaking of which, is he going to use his mental senses to cheat on the final exam? If I had this ability a few years ago, I would have flown away a long time ago. Xie Zhuping blurted out a sentence, but he soon shifted the focus of his attention. That headband. Is it that extraordinaire? Yeah, it's the one from Jintong. Xue Lei confirmed Xie Zhuping's guess. The item they were discussing was fixed to a mechanical arm in front of Luo Nan. Its appearance was very unremarkable. If one didn't have a fixed view of it, it would have been mixed up with the many equipment components in the surroundings. Actually, Xie Zhuping didn't have a clear concept of the power of extraordinaires. However, this didn't prevent him from feeling deep veneration for this spoils of war that had been dyed with the blood of the world's top figures. Of course, he felt even more respect for the victor who obtained this spoils of war. I really didn't see it back then. Hey! Before Xie Zhuping could finish speaking, the headband that had attracted everyone's attention was pulled by the mechanical arm. It was placed squarely on top of Luo Nan's head. Xie Zhuping and the other two all saw it. The headband, which was originally quite wide, clearly shrank the moment it was placed on top of Luo Nan's head. The headband fit perfectly on Luo Nan's forehead. It fit perfectly, as if it was custom-made for Luo Nan. Luo Nan tossed away the electronic pen in his hand right after the headband was placed in place. This was like a signal. The surrounding dozen or so mechanical arms twisted their joints, pushing components and modules from various directions before Luo Nan. Then they began to equip themselves. The miniature energy furnace, chest and abdomen armor, the 4 limbs integrated modules, and other main structures had already undergone many adjustments. They were completely compatible with Luo Nan's figure. It only took 2 seconds to complete. Other parts such as the survival system, mounted weapons, and so on were put on his body one after another. In the blink of an eye, a fully armed deep blue walker appeared before their eyes. TSK. It's like watching a movie. A remake of Iron Man. It looks like it, right? It's just that its color is a bit plain, and it's on the skinny side. Compared to the relaxed attitudes of the 2 youngsters, Qin Yikuan, who was a professional, saw things a bit more. Strictly speaking, this exoskeleton equipment was slimmer than the standard version. Luo Nan should have removed a portion of the mounted equipment and even some parts of the armor. No matter what his goal was, this sort of modification was far too daring for a highly integrated and relatively mature combat platform. In actual combat. Before he could finish his thought, a buzzing vibrating sound rang within the workshop. This was the sign of the miniature energy furnace starting to heat up. The engine's power was rapidly rising. Hey, test the machine here. The second half of Xie Juanping's words were shattered by the explosive sound of an explosion. A gale blew in front of the eyes of the three onlookers. The mechanical arms in the work area swayed back and forth. The idle components on the floor and stage were blown into a mess. The three of them were able to capture the trajectory of the movement. But by the time they turned their heads, the exoskeleton armor had already come to a stop on the other side of the large room. The wall that had just been painted was behind it. Chapter 591. He didn't. At most, he missed by 10 centimeters, and he even turned around. There was no need to talk about Shuelei's eyesight, but he felt a bit bitter in his mouth. This is the support of the exoskeleton. Luo Nan's displacement process of extreme static, extreme movement, and extreme stillness was too barbaric and direct, even though it was the least pressure. He had already awakened, and he had used the 9 orifices and 6 roots technique to stabilize the foundation of his body. If it were an ordinary person, they would have suffered from cerebral ischemia, internal organs would have been displaced, and tendons would have been fractured. But this kind of barbarity would be the ultimate impact and lethality in actual combat. Xuanan pondered to himself. He could barely react to this speed and impact. He wouldn't be killed in an instant, but he would be in a state where he was wide open for 3 rounds at most. No technique would be of any use at that time. He could completely imagine the consequences of falling to the ground. Shuelei understood more and more now that Gym Master Xiao had painstakingly transferred his energy to human-computer interaction. Although he had gone to the simulation chamber to play a few rounds these past few days, his progress in the real world was clearly lagging behind. He needed to have a greater sense of urgency in the future. Shuelei felt that the same situation was a spur, but Qin Ikuan felt that it was more realistic. The exoskeleton emitted a buzzing sound of electricity. It was dense and not noisy. On one hand, it displayed a good body condition. On the other hand, it seemed to have a special mode of action. And at this time, he felt a slight itch on his skin that had yet to dissipate. It was as if he had been struck by static electricity. He looked at Luo Nan's feet. There were no traces of friction at all when he stopped and braked. He immediately understood. Electromagnetic fields. Speaking of which, the Deep Blue platform already has such a mature application? He had teamed up with God for some time. He had seen Maglev before, but he had never seen Luo Nan spin through the void like this. There was not a single trace of smoke and fire in the microcontrol effect. Luo Nan was certainly inferior to a professional soldier in terms of operating skills. This kind of effect was reflected in the transmission or control system. The two professionals each had their own thoughts. Xie Junping, an amateur, only looked at appearances. He saw that the outer layer of Luo Nan's body seemed to have a layer of flickering electricity circulating around it. He heard Qin Ikuan mention electromagnetic fields. He immediately thought of the information he had heard from Shuelei and the others these past few days. He slapped his thigh. Releasing magnetism and discharging electricity. Could it be Jin Tong's unique skill? Is this headband hiding that secret manual? Xie Juanping's idea came out of nowhere, but it was just right. Shuelei and Qin Ikuan were both stupefied to the side. Suddenly, they had the feeling of realization that something like this was possible. Speaking of which, Luo Nan had brought out quite a few things during this period of time. The cage theory could be said to be a consistent accumulation, but the many days of debugging and remodeling high-precision equipment allowed him to have a nose and eyes. Luo Nan had the mysterious flavor of an omnipotent, capable person. Of course, Xie Junping was just making a wild guess, but it was also true. Only now did Luo Nan notice the 3 of them coming over. He stopped the experiment, took off the helmet, and walked over step by step, still wearing the headband. Although Xie Junping was a typical second-generation rich kid, he had very few opportunities to come into close contact with Deep Blue walkers. He immediately stepped forward, rubbed and satisfied his craving. At the same time, he didn't forget to verify the hole in his brain. Nanster, inside this headband. Luo Nan smiled at Xie Jinping. He actually admitted it directly. It's more or less a reference to Jin Tong's model. It's an extraordinary power of electromagnetism. It's also the most universal ability that can be grasped at this stage. Hey, there's really something inside? It's yet to be excavated. Luo Nan used his fingertips to tap the headband, emitting muffled popping sound. This attracted the gazes of the three to focus on the headband. But then he sighed. It's a pity that I can't use this mode for too long with the current strength of my fleshly body. Don't even think about using it in actual combat. I can only use it as a weight-bearing exercise. I can also use it as an experimental machine to verify a few ideas. It's already very strong, okay. Xue Lei had a relatively good understanding of the strength of Luo Nan's body. Even if I can't use that mode just now as my normal state, the short burst of a few dozen seconds is still extremely terrifying. If I'm paired with a blade, I'm dead for sure. Luo Nan still shook his head. If I'm up against an extraordinary, my speed still won't be able to display any advantage. If I were to face them head-on, not to mention anything else, just Jin Tong would be able to shatter both the machine and the person. I'm dead for sure. Xue Lei couldn't hold back from ridiculing. Who told you to go up against an extraordinary? Have you been training with Ghost Eye for the past 2 days? Shouldn't you be increasing your confidence? Luo Nan laughed and didn't continue this topic. Xie Jinping turned to look at Qin Yikuan and asked in a low voice, "Speaking of which, hasn't he been under a bit of pressure lately?" Qin Yikuan could only shake his head. Luo Nan pressed against his ear at this time and received a report from the AI. "Oh, the parts have been delivered?" Xue Lei grinned. 2 whole boxes, over 1,300 kilograms in weight. You want these toys? Don't tell me you want to verify that headband. Luo Nan knew that this was probably the easiest reason for people to accept. Right now, many people expressed curiosity towards the various theories he released. They even questioned their origins. Re, who was far away on the other side of the Pacific Ocean, used this as a breakthrough point to fabricate rumors to disgust him. Luo Nan could obviously ignore this. With his current status, he already had the qualifications to disregard all of this. In all these years, no one had ever asked where Jin Tong's abilities came from. However, being able to give people a basic direction was always a bit better than making random guesses. At the very least, his current remodeling of the Deep Blue platform wasn't wrong in saying this. Luo Nan didn't want to deliberately lie to Xue Lei and his other friends. He didn't give a direct answer. He didn't admit nor deny. After a laugh, he changed the topic. It just so happens that I've run out of materials. With you guys replenishing these, I'll finish the experiments at hand in a spurt of energy. Tonight. Oh, I'll use this weekend as well. Qin Yikuan furrowed his brows. You're not going home? Yeah. 2 days might not even be enough. Hey, hold on. Xue Lei actually recalled the contents of Tianqi's phone call. He repeated the matter of the so-called Mystic Arts Theme Week to Luo Nan in a few words. The Mystic Arts Research Society will be coming over tomorrow to set up the venue. Luo Nan didn't take this seriously. His response was very dull. Let's do it. After all, the property rights are in their hands. Won't it disturb you? Luo Nan had already considered this point. It's fine to just seal off the 5th to 7th floors. I asked Sister Yuang to set up a separate system. It's not the same system as the academy, so it's not a problem to keep it clean. Let's do this for now. I'll talk to them when I have time. The 7th floor was the energy center and the database. The 6th floor was the main body of the laboratory. The 5th floor was the training field. The modified body needed to undergo a more comprehensive examination there. This was the space that Luo Nan had circled out for himself. There were some problems with the legal principles, but he was willing to communicate with the Mystic Arts Research Society. The price could be discussed. Before his credit limit was maxed out, this bit of money really didn't count for much. Xie Junping volunteered. Tang Yi isn't here, so it's easier to talk to the other members of the society. I'll take care of this matter. Okay. Then I'll have to trouble Brother Ping. Oh, there's one more thing. Luonan suddenly thought of a key point. He turned his head to size things up and used the electromagnetic technique that he had just learned a few days ago. He extended his hand and grabbed the electronic pen that he had just tossed down. At the same time, he opened up his work area and brought up the holographic structural diagram of gear. They can mess around with the furnishings of the building, but I don't want them to destroy the overall structure of the room, especially the second, third, and fifth floors above ground. There's also the first and second floors below ground, as well as that large courtyard. He circled 7 or 8 relatively important locations as he spoke. The main structure here is where the essence of my mother's design lies. So, Xie Junping understood tacitly. He patted his chest and guaranteed, I'll keep an eye on them. Only then did he seriously look at the structural diagram. Unfortunately, his eyes were blurry from looking at it, so he couldn't see anything. He just mumbled to strengthen his memory, they can't be destroyed. Otherwise, they'll destroy the layout. How does it have anything to do with feng shui? That's not what I meant. Luonan didn't mind. Instead, he laughed. If we're talking about feng shui, it really does look a bit like it. After all, building here involves the philosophy of man and nature. It's impossible to bypass these things. It was already quite late, and it was already past 6 o'clock. Since Luonan was going to work overtime, Shuelei and the others didn't want to disturb him any longer. They said their goodbyes and left. Luonan watched them leave. He stood in place and adjusted his breathing, calming his mind once more. Only then did he walk back to the middle of the cluster of mechanical arms. He unloaded the body that had just gone through a round of testing. He continued to draw lines and diagrams based on the results of the test, making preparations for the important experiment that was about to happen soon. The lines within the work area were complex, but the virtual brain system interface was already open within the brain domain that the outside world couldn't see. The equipment interface and the large user manual shone before his eyes, providing him with the most direct guidance. Right now Luonan already understood that the main function of the virtual brain system was to manufacture the dynamo core or the psychic core. Moreover, it was to carry out the manufacturing and debugging of the relevant supporting equipment for these precise and peculiar creations. Therefore, the vast majority of the contents of the system's user manual revolved around materials, manufacturing, installation, and debugging. On the other hand, the fundamental nomological foundation of the dynamo core and the psychic core, the configuration, wasn't written too much. It was just a classic example like the fortress. There were also operational instructions, judgment tests, and so on during the conversion process. Of course, this wasn't a good thing for Luonan to further delve into the nomological principles of configuration. But the technical guidance that was extremely close to the practical application level was extremely in line with his current need. Especially since Luonan already possessed the psychic core of the external neuron. He also had the headband as the core conversion equipment. After building this laboratory, all he needed to do was transfer the design ideas within the virtual brain system out. He could compare and verify them one by one. Of course, this was accompanied by a large amount of mistakes and losses. Luonan didn't care about this anymore. After he transformed into Teacher Luo, he received a commission for the usage of the SVIP model. He also received a credit limit that rose with the tide. These were enough to support his willfulness. Luonan was fed with an enormous amount of trial and error opportunities. Even though Luonan couldn't be considered a developer in the relevant field for the time being, he was getting closer and closer to a qualified technician. Chapter 592. Time flowed noiselessly under extreme concentration. He was 30 meters deep underground, and he didn't know the changes of day and night. Luonan just used the experimental mission as a yardstick. Oh, it was a bit shameless to call it an experiment right now. He just followed the requirements of the virtual brain system and tried to assemble usable combat equipment using components from Earth's technology. Luonan occasionally raised his head, only to see that it was 2 o'clock in the morning on the 21st. It was already the winter solstice. Today had quite the significance in the East Asian cultural circles. In the past, his family would gather together no matter what on this day. But today, Luonan had used the rotten excuse of concentrated training to run away. One could imagine the unbearable scene when he returned home. This thought only flashed in Luonan's mind for a moment before it was squeezed out of existence by the flood of information. Right now, the number of virtual and real interfaces before his eyes had already increased to 4. They included the projected work area, the virtual brain system equipment interface, the user manual. In addition, there was a self-inspection interface that had been opened midway. It was labeled Electromagnetic Vanguard Number 1. Right now, the self-inspection progress was nearing its end. The preliminary inspection results had already been arranged in succession, including the relevant analysis. It took up most of his attention. The left arm module has been completely destroyed. I need to replace it. The backup energy furnace has fallen off. I need to recognize this. It's the fault of my design. The outer armor is corroded. I need to replace part of it. The combat blade. I need to bring 2 more spares. It's too easy to break. The kinetic energy arsenal. Large caliber ammunition and javelins. I need to calculate the ratio again. The consumption is too great. I suggest replenishing nearby? Where is nearby? Luonan scratched his head. His fingertips bumped against his headband, which was already a bit warm. He subconsciously changed directions, repeating this process over and over again. The 2 large boxes of spare parts that Shuelei and the others had sent over were originally sorted and stored in the warehouse by the artificial intelligence. Right now, Luonan used his half-baked skills and train of thought to dismantle them into a messy mess. Luckily, the military-grade artificial intelligence that cost him 50 honor points to rent was still worth the price. The virtual brain system hidden deep within the external neuron displayed superior intelligence. As time passed, the collected data was relatively complete, and the progress was finally on the right track. And right now, it was already 5 o'clock in the morning. The multifunctional robot shuttled back and forth between the laboratory and the even more spacious passageway area in front of it, categorizing and arranging his completed works one by one. They were of different sizes and covered a large area. When Luonan walked out of the jungle of mechanical arms, he saw the equipment area that took up 40 to 50 square meters. He sucked in a breath of cold air. Isn't there too much? I can't carry it all at once. Flag-bearer, calculate the weight. Flag-bearer was the code name of the military-grade artificial intelligence. It was the main butler of the laboratory, responsible for the allocation of all resources and basic operations. The relevant data was also readily available. The weight of the equipment is 657.5 kilograms, and the estimated weight of the box is 724 kilograms. As expected, it's time to split them up. Shuelei and the others had brought over a ton of spare parts and materials. They had been condensed to this degree, and this was already Luonan's highest level. Plus, there were also large amounts of ammunition and consumables that were irreplaceable. Luonan didn't waste any more energy. He snapped his fingers. Divide the boxes into 4 batches. Each batch must be under 200 kilograms. The main structural components are prioritized. Oh, there's also the remote maintenance system. Pack it up as well. This counts separately. Following Luonan's command, the multifunctional robots controlled by the flag-bearer rolled their caterpillar belts to get busy once more. Luonan stared from the side. He watched as he imitated, designed, and forged the equipment. Modules and replacement components were loaded into the airdrop boxes one after another. It would be an exaggeration to say that Luo Nan felt a sense of accomplishment in his heart. But the feeling of solidity that was built up bit by bit was something that nothing could replace. 7 days had passed since the lecture on the 14th. Luo Nan had been preparing at all times during these 7 days. He was going to carry out an assassination operation of the highest difficulty. He had personally set up a guillotine, forged shackles, sharpened blades, and increased his preparations bit by bit. All for the final instant when his hand rose and fell. The one he wanted to behead was undoubtedly Gong Qi. He was a spiritual type extraordinary who was currently tossing and turning in the cloud world anchored by his mother. He was one of the top 100 strongest people in the world. Though Luo Nan already had the departed soul of an extraordinary under his hands, he wouldn't overestimate himself because of this. After all, Her Majesty Empress Wu wouldn't take the lead again. She would first beat the enemy to a pulp, injuring his mind. He only had one chance to kill such a powerful enemy. If he missed this chance, the situation would slip to an uncontrollable level. He might even be killed instead. Luo Nan told himself to have patience and determination. He needed to constantly increase his bargaining chip. He also needed to think of ways to weaken Gong Qi's foundation by every possible means. From his perspective, the two were organically unified. In the end, his plan was inseparable from his own ability and the accumulation of bargaining chip. His accumulation wasn't limited to sparring with Ghost Eye. The packing of precision equipment was a large field of study. The complex environment he was about to face put extremely high demands on him. Luo Nan was quite at ease with Standard Bearer, a military-grade AI, doing the calculations. So he set everything aside for the time being. He walked to the living area in the corner of the laboratory and lay down on a single bed. He closed his eyes and adjusted his breathing. Luo Nan finally knew about the matter of Bro Octopus and He Yuan, as well as the matter of Luo Nan's security team drugging him. Luo Nan didn't care about the nature of the matter. What he cared about was the result. He saw that it was the drugging that helped him extricate himself from his extreme exhaustion. It allowed the scattered light of his high-tension state to gather once more. In the end, he realized a major breakthrough. He still couldn't enjoy it to this day. So Luo Nan began to adjust his state of mind and work and rest. He strived to take out a complete period of rest every day. After the lecture on the 14th, his skyrocketed reputation and enormous profit potential had truly diluted the negative effects of the 2000th incident. It gave him some leeway to buffer. Luo Nan meditated and visualized right now. Within the visualization space that seemed to be deep space, stars converged together. It was as if a person was dancing and dancing with joy. The structure of the character I was muddled within the visualization diagram of the star atlas. It formed a dense cluster of galaxies that spun in the void. It was as if it was the center of the universe. Luo Nan's consciousness also merged within, embedding itself in the most core position. It seemed to wander unhurriedly around everywhere. Luo Nan gradually entered a wonderful state of meditative forgetfulness without thought or worry. It was already 8 o'clock in the morning by the time he woke up. 3 hours of high-quality rest had restored his physical strength and energy to full capacity. He passed through the jungle of robotic arms once more and arrived at a spacious and empty area. The modules, components, and ammunition consumables, along with the remote repair system that he had specially requested, were neatly stacked within the 6 airdrop crates. The crates were opened, awaiting Luo Nan's final inspection. Luo Nan checked the list seriously once to confirm that there were no mistakes. In the end, he stopped before the first airdrop crate that was scheduled to be delivered. The entire crate only had a single module installed. The overall outline was extremely close to a human torso. It was like an exoskeleton assembled armor. But Luo Nan knew very well that the interior of the armor had already been stuffed to the brim by the energy furnace and the transmission system. Even Jerry couldn't fit inside. Luo Nan extended his hand to caress the torso module. At the same time, a virtual window labeled Electromagnetic Vanguard 1 was projected onto his retina, conducting a final inspection. Of course, this module wasn't meant for human use. It wasn't a wearable device. It was a design that was completely different from the idea of exoskeleton armor, and the control terminal of this design came from the headband that Luo Nan wore. It was the God-binding headband that was displayed in the virtual brain system. Oh, I hope this toy can endure more tossing and turning. Even if it was only temporary, it couldn't be changed every day. In the end, his level as a designer wasn't high enough. Luo Nan sighed. He patted the outer armor of the module and stood up. The multifunctional robot that was already waiting to the side came forward to carry out the final sealing of the crate. After everything was done, Luo Nan picked up one of the crates and gave it a feel. He nodded. There shouldn't be any problems. The 200-kilogram airdrop crate was only one size smaller than the crate that Shui Lei and the others had brought over yesterday. The average person really wouldn't be able to lift it. For Luo Nan, who was already awakened, this bit of weight was nothing. But what he had to do next was far more difficult than lifting the crate by 100 times. Luo Nan took a deep breath and just sat cross-legged in front of the 6 airdrop crate. He extended his hand to support the first crate that was about to be delivered. His eyes were half closed, and the position of his mind rose in an instant. He suddenly passed through 30 meters of ground and crossed 1,000 meters in the air. A thought floated in the air above Xia City. It was the highest level of traffic. He looked down from high above and overlooked the enormous city within the thin morning mist. He could see tens of thousands of high-rise buildings distributed within a 200-kilometer radius. They formed the main structure of Xia City. 200 million residents lived within this steel jungle. They were like insects crawling within the branches and leaves of the vines. Together, they formed the entire ecology of Xia City. Expanding outwards, there was the boundless ocean to the east. The 4 satellite cities of Xia City were distributed in a ring in the north, south, and south directions. There was also a military defense line further out. The outermost area was close to 300 kilometers away from the center of Xia City. This was also the limit of the entire Xia City metropolitan area. If one looked further out, the open sea was not counted. The inland area was a vast plain and fertile land. Before the era of distortion, there used to be a bustling city with a dense population. Presently, it was already a desolate land where mutants wreaked havoc. There was such a clear boundary between prosperity and desolation. But on a more macroscopic level, it was only a part of this planet's ecosystem. To put it more broadly, it was nothing more than a speck of dust within this space and time. Chapter 593. There were at least 5 or 6 different space-time structures distributed within the range of Luo Nan's mental senses. This included the Earth that bore and gave birth to Luo Nan. It even included the most grand universe that stretched out endlessly. It also included the mysterious cloud world. If one were to lower the standard even further, Xia City and its surrounding extraordinaries had their own unique laws and laws. Though they were not stable, Xia City and its surrounding extraordinaries had their own unique laws and laws. Of course, this also included Luo Nan, who was the origin of the large coordinate system that continued to spread out. There were also 2 other relatively unique existences. One was the psychic wave network that covered Xia City and its surroundings. Some of its tentacles extended to the entire world. This network had been operated by President Ouyang for many years. Even though it was mostly used as a communication network, when it formally interfered with the material plane, its laws were strict and strict. It was a body of its own, not inferior to any extraordinary domain. The other was the unique building where Luo Nan's fleshly body resided. It was Gear. From Luo Nan's perspective, there was a domain quietly taking form with Gear as its axis. It used a single gear to drive a myriad of orders. From near to far, from real to virtual, it combed and operated the chaotic and disorderly energy and information between heaven and earth. It coupled and organized, gathering astonishing energy in silence. It projected a long chain that anchored the distant space-time, erecting a bridge that linked the two worlds. Such space-time laws were in no way inferior to those of the extraordinary domain. They even surpassed them in terms of level and scope. This was his mother's work. It was indeed like a feng shui layout, but it was also a domain that possessed its own laws. It was a grand, extraordinary configuration. At this very moment, Luo Nan was using the laws of Gear to do something that even extraordinaries would find hard to do. He roughly observed the surrounding environment and confirmed that there were already extraordinaries overflowing in Xia City. For the time being, there weren't any major powers paying attention to him. After the cage theory came out, contact is invasion became a hot phrase in the inner world. There were even people from the Ability User Society who jointly proposed to enact a Privacy Act. The content was probably to restrict the willful casting of psychic ability users' senses and so on. Let's not talk about whether or not this purely eye-catching act had any meaning. The mental senses and lock-ons of extraordinaries were much more cautious and conservative than usual in this sensitive period. Especially for Luo Nan. This really did give Luo Nan ample space. It also made him more daring and reckless when he did things. Luo Nan's thoughts plunged in the opposite direction, cast towards the gear that seemed to be spinning yet not spinning in the depths of the jungle of the North Bank. And at this time, an incorporeal and mystical structure opened up in the depths of the void, forming a passageway that led straight to the distant space-time. The passageway pulled Luo Nan's thoughts over, and in the blink of an eye, an unstoppable gale and cloud assaulted his face. In a certain sense, the cloud world was simply Luo Nan's own back garden. If those two unwelcome guests weren't here, then it would be even more deserving of its reputation. The thought that Luo Nan projected was like a kite fluttering leisurely in the air. It made a turn within the turbulent clouds. It was just a turn, but the environment of the void where it was located was painted with other colors. Clouds surged high up in the sky at this moment, clearly reflecting the image of a jungle and the buildings hidden within. To be exact, it was the jungle of the north shore of Acumen College, where Luo Nan currently resided. This image faded to almost nothingness. It was undoubtedly a mirage. And in just half a second, colors were added to this mirage scene. A rough reddish-black background could be faintly seen. The shape of an undulating mountainous region was faintly discernible. There was also dark red lava that spread and flowed. Two completely different scenes of nothingness mixed together with the surging clouds high up in the sky. The colors were mottled, and it was dazzling to the eye. A mushed-mouthed ape just so happened to pass by nearby. It was also bewitched by this marvelous scene. It bared its teeth and rushed over, seeming to want to touch this marvelous scene. Luo Nan's hand, which was supporting the airdrop box in the underground 6th floor of Gear, didn't move at all. He just slightly tightened his brows. The word that was resplendent with starlight within his visualized space seemed to truly come alive. It folded its hands, bent its knees, and spun and danced. The myriad stars that converged to form the word I blended into one entity, and they each formed their own star orbits. They drew a boundless star atlas in the deep void. Luo Nan's soul strength, which he had accumulated explosively over the past few days, circulated and transformed within this star atlas. It naturally converged and fused, condensing into an indistinct and immeasurable point at the very center of the star atlas. It became the sole origin of the vast coordinate system, and it couldn't be moved. When this coordinate system took form, Luo Nan's mind, the laboratory he resided in, the cloud world of another spacetime continuum, and even the rough and gloomy nameless mountainous region clearly rang with a muffled roar of thunder. When the sound of thunder crushed down Gear, the cloud world, and the nameless mountainous region. These three spacetime structures had always operated according to their own laws and rules. They froze in an instant. It was only for an instant. Perhaps it was 1,000th of a second or even a 10,000th of a second. Then they recovered their fixed operating trajectories. But in that instant of freezing, the airdrop box that Luo Nan's hand pressed down on became the only moving object. This so-called movement was not the ordinary form of sliding, dropping, or flying. In that instant, the light and shadow of its body warped. It was like a mirage, and it suddenly disappeared. The two intersecting scenes of the mirage in the cloud world disappeared as well. So much so that the mushed-mouthed ape could only stare blankly at the thick layer of clouds that hadn't changed for many years after charging over. Luo Nan's eyes were still half-closed, but his mind was a thread ahead of time. He set off from the origin and drew a long, perfectly straight line. He imprinted a point on the large coordinate system. The coordinates of that point was his designated destination. The line was flat and straight. It didn't bend in the slightest. But in this moment, the airdrop box that crossed space drew an indescribably complex trajectory in the dark and unfathomable void. It pierced through the barrier of space and time twice in succession. Only then did its short and gorgeous journey come to an end. It truly possessed powerful kinetic energy. It carried the whooshing sound of the wind as it descended diagonally to the ground from a height of several dozen meters in midair. The air it pierced through already carried the fishy smell of rotten eggs. This was the result of the long years of accumulation of sulfides and halide gases that were spewed out by the intense volcanic activity. The airdrop box's journey was nearing its end. All that remained was time for the show of universal gravitation. Luo Nan's eyelids blinked, but they didn't completely open. In this moment, his originally vigorous and abundant soul strength was like the water of a lake that had its bottom completely ruptured. The water level dropped by more than half in an instant. The excessively terrifying output of soul strength caused his brain to experience a short period of dizziness. But he couldn't afford to rest. His consciousness locked tightly onto the falling airdrop box. He calculated its position and distance on the plane of his soul cloak. The airdrop box's shock absorber equipment automatically activated when it felt the movement of the box. It attempted to correct its posture and weaken the impact. But before these equipment could truly display their use, a figure leaped up from a certain fissure in the ground diagonally below. The figure rose into the air and firmly grabbed the falling airdrop box before landing on the ground with ease. Chapter 594. Though he was vexed, he still had to do the work that needed to be done. Luo Nan spent an entire morning to send 5 of the 6 airdrop boxes over. Actually, in terms of pure soul strength consumption and replenishment, it wasn't hard to replenish it under the effect of the closed-system large production line, even though the consumption of soul strength was enormous. What was truly troublesome was the amount of energy consumed during this period of time. It was truly immeasurable. Luo Nan didn't dare to forcefully do this sort of thing. He did his best to follow his normal routine and eat the breakfast and lunch that Rui Wen sent over. He took a short nap before sending the last box of ammunition and consumables away. It was already 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Luo Nan only gasped for breath before opening up the electronic map. He set it to a 3-dimensional panoramic mode and studied the schedule for this afternoon. He suddenly felt something in his heart when he was pondering with a frown. He turned his head and saw Rui Wen, who had been resting here in the afternoon. She stood quietly to the side, concentrating on looking at the map. The plump Jerry was squatting on her shoulder in a rare moment of honesty, his long tail wagging back and forth. Luo Nan laughed. What, curious about that side? He never hid anything from Rui Wen, and he was very confident in Rui Wen's ability to keep secrets. This was a tacit understanding between the two. Of course, Luo Nan also admitted that his plan wouldn't have succeeded without Rui Wen's participation. Rui Wen turned her head and asked softly, "Should I go too?" It was quite rare for this little girl to open her mouth and speak. Though Luo Nan's mind was full of thoughts, his mood relaxed quite a bit. He laughed even more happily. "You can go if you want, but today is Friday. It's still school time. You didn't go." How could a child speak such big truths? Luo Nan was a bit embarrassed. Though he wasn't a good student in the past, he was still a well-behaved child. He went to school on time, did experiments, and stayed up late at night. But now he had waded into the muddy waters of the inner world. He was faced with life and death struggles, blades and swords, and the pressure of time and tide waiting for no man. The school curriculum could only be chuckled in comparison. Well, wasn't this a bad example for Rui Wen? Luo Nan hadn't considered such matters before, but ever since he had that conversation with Emoya that night, a corresponding sense of responsibility had awakened. He felt a mountain of pressure for a time. Rui Wen, it's like this. We students need to study properly and make progress every day. This is a critical period, and I have no choice but to do this. After this matter is settled, I will definitely study hard. Otherwise, how can I cough? Luo Nan had forcefully swallowed back the words, "get a fu in society." It suddenly occurred to him that not only was this cliché meaningless, but it was also an extremely crude lie to members of the inner world like them. Although Rui Wen was autistic, she was very smart. Luo Nan had always believed that. Luo Nan was stumped for 2 seconds before forcefully changing the direction. "What I'm trying to say is that the experiences at school are extremely precious and important. They are an indispensable part of our entire lives. Luo Wen yi tu luo li lu tu shi tu he tu." It was also at this moment that the way of thinking that he had developed over the years automatically helped him shift onto the right track. My grandfather, and of course your grandfather, the one we visited at the sanatorium last weekend. In his formatting theory, there is a section on student, related to the social format. You can imagine how important it is. For now, you just need to remember. Only by fully observing and delving into the present environment, from home to school to society, can you have your own experiences. Only then will you be able to form a complete personality. This is what distinguishes us from other people. This is the basis for normal communication. This is the foundation for establishing oneself. Wasn't what he said a bit deep? Rui Wen asked him right as Luo Nan was pondering, "Is my personality incomplete?" Rui Wen gazed at him. "My memory is very short. My experiences are very few. I'm different from other people. In that case, my personality would be incomplete." "How can you say that?" Luo Nan retorted in a loud voice in the first instant. But then he was stuck once more. Rui Wen's deduced conclusion wasn't wrong. This was already the confirmed conclusion of the branch's laboratory. But he couldn't admit it no matter what. Luo Nan hadn't sweated as much as he did right now, even though he had toiled for an entire morning to transport a 1-ton item 2,000 kilometers away. At this moment, he just wanted to kidnap a child psychologist to use as a reference. Rui Wen was still gazing at him. Luo Nan had always felt that those gloomy eyes shouldn't belong to a child. They were so deep and unfathomable. But now that he thought about it again, it might be more accurate to describe them as emptiness. Rui Wen still couldn't find her own position. Did she still think of herself as a crow? Luo Nan's heart felt even more stuffy. He wanted to give himself a slap. This mouth. No, this IQ. Actually, the one with an incomplete personality should be him, right? Suddenly, a light flashed in Luo Nan's mind. He didn't think too deeply and just blurted out, "That. It's very normal to have an incomplete personality. I'm not perfect right now either. This is because we're still children. We haven't reached adulthood yet. But our personalities are always developing. In terms of knowledge, in terms of learning, in terms of interpersonal relationships, the more we observe, the more we interact, the more we deal with. Only then will we be endlessly perfected. Luo Nan didn't know whether or not this was considered consolation, but he decided to keep Rui Wen company. He wanted to let her know that she wasn't a lonely and alienated person in this world. It's not a problem if my memory is missing. I remember everything I did before I was 10 years old. After that, it was all experiments. 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 Just thinking about it makes me regret it. Luo Nan was basically speaking without thinking. He was worried that he wouldn't be able to stop himself. He rushed to make a conclusion. So, we need to make up for our lessons right now. Not only do we need to make up for our lessons in knowledge, we also need to make up for our lessons in interpersonal relationship. It hasn't been long since you joined the class. You need to pay attention to building a good relationship with your classmates. Okay, it's fine to be an invisible person, but you need to pay attention to your observations. Skipping classes is also a type of experience, but it's still too radical. Rui Wen blinked her eyes. This small movement removed a bit of the oppressive feeling from her gaze. It gave her a bit of a cute flavor. Rui Wen had already begun to grow her hair out under the strong request of Mrs. Luo Shuqing and teacher Moya. She had accumulated 2 months of sleep and had been styled by a famous designer. She had a cool androgynous style, but she had also softened the contours of her facial features. According to Moya, a professional, it had the effect of killing both men and women. Luo Nan was a bit convinced now, but he didn't dare to relax. He continued to do his best to convince her. You'll be teaching in small classes at the middle school level. You'll be able to see who you're missing with a single glance. When the time comes, teacher will give aunt and uncle a call, and the two of us will have to eat the cake together. Come, act as a perfect cover for your brother. This way our relationship will be even firmer, and our family relations will be handled perfectly. In the end, Luo Nan still revealed his true intentions. He pushed Rui Wen outside. You'll first catch up to my progress in supplementary classes. Then we'll work hard together and supervise each other. We'll perfect each other's personalities. This is what a good brother and sister should be like. A good family. Luo Nan already didn't know what nonsense he was babbling about. Luckily, Rui Wen was very obedient. She basically wouldn't refuse Luo Nan's arrangements. She was pushed into the elevator by Luo Nan just like that. "Oh right. You don't need to deliver food tonight. I'm busy." Luo Nan finally let out a long breath as he watched Rui Wen ride the elevator up. He turned his head to look at the empty laboratory area. He still had a lingering fear. He made a firm resolution. He would definitely ask He Wang to help him find a senior psychologist to seriously solve the problem Rui Wen was currently facing. He did what he said. He deliberated over his words for a bit and left a message for He Wang on the psychic wave network. She was probably still busy. She didn't immediately respond. Luo Nan didn't wait any longer. He composed himself and walked back to the laboratory area to deal with some loose ends. Everything was in order half an hour later. He followed his predetermined plan and walked to the lounge. He activated the completely sealed simulation chamber that he had specially purchased. Luo Nan was able to truly calm his mind within the tight and sealed environment of the chamber. His mind flowed along the soul cloak that practically surrounded the Earth. He followed the predetermined coordinates to a reference object, and with a large leap, he arrived at an area 2,000 kilometers away. This was a dry cave located within a mountain. The temperature was maintained at around 40 degrees. It was originally just a relatively large rock crevice. Later, Mo Luan, who was stationed here, forcefully carved out a hidden space to serve as a forward operating base. Mo Luan sat cross-legged in a corner of the forward operating base right now. A maintenance robot was busy at work. The various module parts that had been sent over had already been assembled and replaced on the simple and crude workbench. The maintenance work had already been completed. Right now, only a few minor details were being handled. The electromagnetic Vanguard 1 was undoubtedly on the workbench. Its overall appearance was similar to that of the exoskeleton-clad military police. If a professional familiar with military equipment were to look at it, it would be very easy to discover that this was actually a standard NCOX-2 humanoid robot platform. This type of robot was actually quite rare in the military. Its practicality wasn't high, but it suited Luonan's needs very well. He borrowed the existing platform to carry out modifications and processing. After a few days of running in, the external appearance was more or less the same, but the most fundamental operating mechanism was already completely different. Luonan adjusted himself to the most comfortable position in the simulation chamber. Let's begin now. Let's strive for 2.5 days to build the foundation. Luonan's consciousness was transferred to the divine binding hoop through the virtual brain system. He issued a clear command. Core mode implantation. At the same time as Luonan issued the command, the wraith sign shuttling through the clouds froze in another part of space and time. It was as if the wraith sign had become a world of its own. The flowing bloody light and lava above the towering structure of the Blood Soul Temple flowed even faster. There was only a single seed imprint within the 4th floor of the temple hall. It transformed into light under the pressure of this internalized force, piercing through the void once more. 1,000th of a second later, the seed imprint accurately pierced into the forward operating base inside the mountain. It hovered for a bit inside the room. Then, under Luonan's command, it was thrown into the anthropomorphic head armor of the electromagnetic Vanguard 1. There were large amounts of sensory instruments, auxiliary computing systems, and so on integrated here. And within this space, where every inch of land was worth its weight in gold, there was a square piece of metal lying horizontally. It was the size of an infant's fist, and it tumbled back and forth under the effect of magnetic force. It was completely different from the other components of the instrument. The seed imprint was directly inserted into it. Chapter 595. Core Mode Implantation, Initiating System Self-Check. Insufficient automatic core component, indicating power output of 3 bars. In the eye sockets of the fully enclosed helmet, the gathered electricity dimmed down again, leaving only 2 weak spots of light, like the residual heat of metal after high-temperature processing. Luonan obtained the latest test results from the virtual brain interface and the window of the divine binding hoop. To be honest, it wasn't very ideal. 3 boxes. As expected, I lost some of what I collected yesterday. Luonan was unable to understand the power units of the virtual brain system and the soul binding hoop. He found it troublesome to translate, so he simply displayed it in graphical mode. The graphical interface showed that 10 grids were full, and the current indicating power had reached 3 grids. There was still a gap of nearly half to the basic line of 5 grids to activate the battle machinery. Luonan wasn't surprised by this result. Didn't he come all this way for the sake of solving the problem? He continued to issue commands, and the virtual brain system smoothly connected to the spirit binding hoop and gave feedback. Manual activation of remote control mode. Initiating mental link. Synchronization rate 73%, 82%, 97%. Synchronization complete. Current delay 0.2 milliseconds. In this moment, Luonan's thick soul strength joined with the seed imprint that had just been transplanted into the electromagnetic Vanguard's head armor. A circle of electricity circulated and diffused, transforming into a brand new interference mode. The metal block that carried the seed imprint also became very stable. It no longer rolled randomly and formed a certain rotation pattern. In the hollow eye sockets of electromagnetic Vanguard 1, electric sparks flickered once more. Very soon, its control system was fully activated. The energy, transmission, perception, and other modules were connected one by one, allowing this combat machine to continuously turn its head, swing its arms, and bend and extend its arms. Then, like a normal person, it lightly jumped off the workbench. Luo Nan lay quietly within the simulation chamber, but his mental plane was extremely active. It was he who possessed the electromagnetic vanguard number 1 and performed all of the above actions. This was an expedient measure before the seed imprint took root and sprouted, but it was still an interesting experience. It was similar to the real-life version of Frost River reality. It was also an advanced version of remote mechanical control. Of course, there were even more wondrous places inside. Although the power of the seed imprint was low, it was not idle. It was still using a special method to observe all of this with clairvoyance. It was trying to coordinate and respond through Luo Nan. Luo Nan was controlling number 1, but he was also cooperating with number 1. They were together in the forward operating base. At this time, other than paying attention to the core components, Luo Nan was also inspecting the other components and the overall situation of the system. He was making fine adjustments according to specific problems. The maintenance robot that was specially sent over became the busiest one, following number 1. Luo Nan didn't do these things himself. After all, his reserves of knowledge in this area weren't enough. In the underground laboratory of Gear, the one responsible for the overall allocation of resources and basic operations was the military-grade AI flagbearer, and in this forward operating base, the one carrying out the corresponding missions was the external neuron. This miraculous creation, whose origins were still unclear to this day, displayed an extraordinary level of intelligence. Its overwhelming control over Earth's technology was perfectly reflected here. After about 40 minutes of testing, the effectiveness of the electromagnetic vanguard system and the operation of the modules were basically in the normal range, and they had successfully passed the various traps created by the novice designer. As for the deeper problems, they could only be tested in practice. Right now it was already 3 in the afternoon. Luo Nan decided to leave the cave, set out. Number 1 headed outside. Concealment had already been taken into consideration when constructing the forward operating base. There were also some geological problems, so the passageway leading outside was rather winding. Many places were barely passable. This could also be considered a test of the electromagnetic vanguard's control. At first, this remote-controlled combat machine had some friction with the volcanic rocks on all sides. Occasionally, sparks would burst out, but soon, the sound of friction and scraping disappeared without a trace. This wasn't just because Luo Nan was used to controlling combat machines. This included the core seed imprint's grasp of the external environment. It quickly became sharp and reasonable. 2 minutes later, the electromagnetic vanguard number 1 passed through a stream of semi-solidified lava. Sunlight could already be seen shining down ahead. This place was a time zone away from Xia City. It was roughly around 2 in the afternoon. Even though the weather wasn't good, there was still dusky sunlight shining down. There was the exit. Number 1 slid down again. The dust from the magnetic levitation's recoil was still swirling. The foul air within the narrow and cramped passageway began to stir restlessly. An unforeseen event had occurred. A 4-legged, short-tailed, scaled monster leaped out from the stream of semi-solidified lava that number 1 had just passed through. It displayed outstanding explosive power. The faint sound of tumbling lava could be heard. Its sharp blade-like tongue had already pierced through the connection between number 1's armor and helmet. But at this moment, crackling electric flames leaped up from number 1's all-metal body. The air hummed and vibrated, so much so that the surrounding bumpy rock strata trembled and cracked. A short hissing sound came from the scaled monster's throat. This fellow didn't even have time to spit out corrosive venom from its tongue before number 1's magnetic field suddenly expanded outward. It lost its target and direction in a muddle-headed manner, flinging itself over number 1's shoulder. Number 1's limbs didn't move. The direction of the electric field's intensity instantly changed. It formed a powerful blade-like arc of electricity that directly bombarded the scaled monster's body. Under the high pressure, the scaled monster was instantly turned into charcoal. Number One's gliding speed didn't even change after this counterattack. It continued to move toward the area illuminated by the dusky sunlight. As it passed by the scaled monster's corpse, the severely deformed charred corpse burst into flames with a bang. The flames were slightly red and a bit dark. The color of the light was like a layer of tainted blood. But the flames were truly vicious. The scaled monster, which was the length of an adult's arm, was burned to ashes in a short half a second. Only the flames that exploded at the last moment seemed to be affected by the electromagnetic field. The flames chased after Number One's figure, circling around it like a spirit snake. Only then did they extinguish. When the flames were extinguished, the orderly rotating metal cube in Number One's head cavity glowed a bit red. Then it returned to its original state. Luonan shot a glance at the window of the god-binding hoop. He saw that the 4-grid power meter had no reaction at all. He couldn't help but shake his head. The conversion rate was simply inhumanly low. Not to mention the problem of energy dissipation and loss before a qualitative change was formed. Luonan's resolve to complete his plan grew firmer. Number One faced the direction of the sunlight at this time. It charged upward, arriving above the mountain where the forward operating base was located. Luonan's vision and the senses of the combat machinery's instruments were effectively combined. They were separated into layers, spreading out layer by layer. In this place there was no feeling of looking down on all the mountains. This volcanic area was overflowing with the smell of sulfur. Not a blade of grass grew in this place. In fact, it was formed from several hundred large and small hills. Every hill could be considered a volcanic crater. Their average height was no more than 200 to 300 meters. Right now, most of them were still emitting flames and smoke. It was as if they could erupt at any time. Oh, it's erupting. Over a dozen kilometers away, a mountaintop suddenly spewed out large amounts of steam. It surged up nearly 100 meters. The surface of the ground seemed to have turned into a viscous mud. It surged and undulated endlessly. There were also enormous bulges that protruded and cracked. Sparks flew chaotically. The cycle repeated itself, and the inner layer faintly emitted the dark red glow of lava. This was a scene that could never be seen in Xia City. The volcanic area where electromagnetic vanguard Number One was located nearly 2,000 kilometers southwest of Xia City. It was already close to the western side of the Indochina Peninsula. It was an area where the Eurasian Plate and the Indian Ocean Plate collided. Intense volcanic activity had occurred in the geologic era, and after the start of the Third World War and the arrival of the Age of Distortion, this area was razed to the ground in the most chaotic era. The flames of war and the wanton use of weapons of mass destruction turned this area into scorched earth. And in the process of reconstruction after the war, this area was naturally excluded from the scope of large metropolitan areas due to its poor geographical location. The closest large metropolis to this area was Spring City. It contrasted well with Xia City, and the two were indeed sister cities. Spring City was nearly 500 kilometers away from this area. It couldn't be said to be far, but it was definitely not an area of effective control. In fact, whether it was in the secular society or the inner world, this volcanic area could be considered a taboo. This was because 3 years ago, this place was still a battlefield where extraordinaries bombarded each other. Back then, this volcanic area was the center. Within a range of 2,000 square kilometers, the heavens collapsed and the earth split. It was completely changed beyond recognition. The force of the impact even pierced through the Earth's crust, detonating the group of volcanoes underground. It turned the already devastated volcanic area into its current state. Luonan knew of one of the extraordinaries who participated in this battle. It was Her Majesty Empress Wu's RT-8313 mission post on headquarters website. It was Mr. Jin Buhuan, the one who hinted that he wanted to act like a rogue against the Empress Wu. Not long after this message was posted, this successful extraordinary businessman engaged in a spectacular battle here. Then he disappeared from everyone's line of sight. Jean Bouhuan's disappearance caused a sensation back in the day. It was in no way inferior to the disappearance, death, of Jean Tong in the outer seas of Xia City. It was just that on the night of the 14th, Luonan had used the divine binding hoop to indirectly confirm Jean Tong's death. And Jean Bouhuan's life and death had always been a mystery. A year or two after the battle, this place was still a hot area for ability users to explore and excavate. But now it was much more deserted. At the very least, Luonan didn't see a single existence other than the various mutant life forms that were always active on the ground and within the lava. This included ability users, normal people, and even the rumored vagabonds of the wilderness. Chapter 596. The ring-shaped drone somersaulted back and forth within the steam cloud. No matter how miserable it was, it persisted and remained the same. It displayed its extreme stubbornness. After going back and forth a few times, Luonan had a general understanding. This should be some kind of field sampling work. From the direction of the electromagnetic waves, the operator was several hundred kilometers away. Perhaps they were still in Spring City. This was a relatively safe method of scientific research. Luonan didn't really care. Of course, he didn't want others to pay attention to his actions and cause unnecessary interference. So he controlled the combat robot to go down from the side of the hill, avoiding any possible surveillance cameras or radar. Those things were still a bit of a hindrance, but the place Luonan wanted to go was still quite far. A small detour was nothing. Luonan made a detour from the side of the hill. The drone in the sky completed another roll and shuttle within the steam cloud. This time, it swayed and shot out a net-like object. It seemed to encircle some matter that was ejected from the crater of the volcano. Then it turned around and left. The sampling was successful? Luonan's mental senses focused a bit. He saw that there were 2 or 3 1-centimeter-long fiery red ants encircled within the specially made fine net. These fellows could be considered large among their species. They were struggling fiercely, but they didn't have many methods to deal with the specially made bug net. The ring-shaped drone accelerated in a straight line, quickly distancing itself from the steam cloud. Clearly, its target here was undoubtedly these ants. The source of interference was gone. 2,000 kilometers away, Luonan frowned from within the simulation pod. What a coincidence! The other party was also interested in the Vulcan ants? Oh, this wasn't strange at all. After all, the Vulcan ants were the star mutant species of this volcanic area. They represented a typical mutant species ecology. They had been very popular in recent years. Many research dogs were counting on them to publish papers and graduate. Just take a sample and go back for analysis. It's best if we don't meet again. It was impossible for Luonan to make the volcanic area his private hunting ground. With the current level of technological advancement, there would be satellite imaging even if there were no drones. Playing with a single drone was just a dream. He could only eliminate the interference as much as possible. Luonan suddenly discovered that the speed of the drone, which was already far away in the horizon, had suddenly slowed down while he was pondering. It swayed back and forth. In the end, it was unable to advance any further. It slowly descended. It seemed that there was a malfunction. Luonan's mental senses kept track of it from beginning to end. He saw the struggling appearance of the machine, and he could imagine the unwillingness of the remote controller several hundred kilometers away. It has nothing to do with me. Luonan decided to temporarily lower his moral level and ignore the situation over there. He wanted to complete his own plan earlier and calm his mind earlier. The target area of Luonan's plan was located 140 kilometers away. The target was over there. The forward operating base was over here. The distance between the two was quite far. It wasn't that Luonan was looking for trouble for himself. It was just that the most famous manic zone of the volcanic area was not far away from the forward operating base. Not far from a rather inconspicuous dividing line towards the southwest, in this desolate area that was covered in volcanic ash and lava, piles of bones of different colors appeared. There were even corpses that had not been completely devoured and completely corroded. Not to mention the corpses of the animals. Just by looking at the bones alone, one would be able to see the bones. They were also very strange. Gray, black, white, red, green, and many other colors were mixed together. It was practically impossible to find two piles of bones that were more or less the same. Luonan crossed the dividing line and went 2 to 3 kilometers in. Finally, a living creature appeared before his eyes. It was a skinny and bony canine creature. Calling it a canine was only a rough estimation based on its outer appearance. The half-rotten fur on its body, as well as its abnormally swollen head and some of its limbs and joints, had already caused this fellow to be severely deformed. It was very hard to distinguish it in detail. Anyone who saw this sort of situation would think that this fellow could fall to the ground at any moment. But when the electromagnetic Vanguard 1 entered the territory of this canine creature, a strangely sharp howl came from its throat. Its 4 limbs exerted force at the same time, and it charged towards the Vanguard 1 like an artillery shell. The half-rotten wounds on the canine creature's body spurted out turbid liquid at practically the same time due to the excessive force exertion. There were even some impurities mixed within. The liquid exploded and dispersed in the instant it left its body. It was as if it brought forth a dark gray and green cloud. Plague Hound. Luonan silently recited the name he had given to this canine creature. As for the more authoritative scientific name, sorry, there was no need for that. The electromagnetic Vanguard 1's left arm bent and rose up. The built-in Gauss rifle module sprayed a standard bullet out of the muzzle at high speed under the effect of a powerful electric field. The Plague Hound was still 10 meters away from the Vanguard 1 when the bullet pierced its skull. The enormous kinetic impact caused its entire head and the thick front half of its body to be smashed into smithereens. The exploded limbs and flesh were still in midair when they were scorched by the leaping electric fire. They transformed into strands of green smoke that dissipated into the air. This was certainly not the result that could be achieved with a purely kinetic firearm. The other half of the corpse could be seen to be like the scaly monster in the rock crevice. It was rapidly burned to nothing within the blood-colored flames. Crisp, crackling sounds rang from within the flesh and blood of the corpse as it burned. Several dozen 1-centimeter-long fiery red ants attempted to charge out from the flames, but in the end, they were turned to ashes one after another. These ants were exactly the same as the samples captured by the crashed unmanned drone. They were the star mutants of this volcanic area. Vulcan ants. The parasitic state is becoming more and more unstable. According to the research data, this nest of Vulcan ants has reached the time for a new generation. At this time, the ant colony's control is at its weakest, but the queen's combat strength is at its strongest. Excellent. The stronger the better. The current scouting network Luonan was using was his mental senses and the AI Vanguard 1's intelligent sensing module, which was constructed together. The layers were rich, and they complemented each other. He soon confirmed that the manic mutants under the parasitic control of the Vulcan ants had received abnormal stimulation from this direction. They had temporarily stopped hunting and killing each other. With a shake of their bodies, they had transformed into loyal and devoted guardians. They swarmed in his direction. This was the result Luonan hoped to achieve. Therefore, the electromagnetic Vanguard 1 did not dodge or evade under his control. It continued to advance toward the target area 100 kilometers away according to the previously set route. However, it had only taken a few steps when the Gauss rifle module, which had just achieved success, lifted up once more. The bullet hummed and rumbled as it fired. It struck a perfectly straight diagonal line within the dusky smoke and dust. It accurately struck a large eagle with its wings spread and circling 2 kilometers away. It was nearly 700 meters in the air. The outcome was more or less the same as that of the plague dog. The large eagle was instantly blasted into smithereens. However, what shot out wasn't flesh and blood, but precise mechanical parts. The lightning in Vanguard 1's eye sockets extinguished twice, and Luo Nan retracted his words. Chapter 597. This unforeseen event did not affect Luo Nan's determination to carry out his plan. He checked his energy reserves one last time and confirmed that he could complete a one-way charge under the intense killing. Then he controlled the combat machine to take large strides and attack in a straight line. At the same time, black smoke that was near nothingness flowed through the gaps between the rock and soil. It was Mo Luan moving stealthily underground. With Luo Nan drawing its attention, it effectively avoided the eyes and ears of the vast majority of the defenders. It rapidly approached the target area. And at this time, from the perspective of the electromagnetic Vanguard No. 1, it could faintly see an unceasingly approaching gray line ahead. It was a skirmish line formed by several dozen mutants similar to plague dogs. This was just a small unit. Behind this skirmish line, on the 2 flanks, and even behind the electromagnetic Vanguard No. 1, there were already threats accumulating. The mutants under the control of the Vulcan ants are manifesting more and more clearly in terms of organization and sociality. The conclusion of a certain summary flashed through Luo Nan's mind. It echoed with this phenomenon, but it did not leave a trace in Luo Nan's mind. He still controlled the Gauss rifle module to a single-shot state. He did not seek to block the mutants' assault momentum. He just followed the most precise and efficient method to kill them one by one. This feeling was quite familiar. It was like playing a more realistic Frost River reality game. But what was different from the game was that every time he made a move, the metal block within his head armor would always transmit sets of electrical signals. These were the transliterations of the seed imprint's various judgment reactions. These signals gave the combat machine's computing system a set of judgment options, and they were directly used on Luo Nan's mental plane. They gave him a highly optimized reference plan. As an extraordinary, or more accurately speaking, as the wilderness hunter, Jin Tong, how would he react when faced with this kind of ever-changing situation? The hissing sound of wind brushed in from the flank. A long ochre-red snake, nearly the same color as the surrounding volcanic rocks, leaped up from the ground with its upper body. It clearly wanted to coil around the left arm module that spat out death bullet. But what welcomed it was a blade light that came from an even trickier angle. The long ochre-red snake was cut in half by a single blade strike. The crackling electricity extinguished the life force of the parasitic Vulcan ant within its body at the same time. It was straightforward and efficient. At least 70% of the credit for this blade was due to the stress response of the seed imprint. Luo Nan was more like a guide. The feedback from the imprint of the Jin Tong seed grew stronger and stronger over the course of a few days. It grew faster and faster, giving Luo Nan quite good pointers and benefit. But this was not enough, far from enough. And that group of people didn't have enough, right? No. 1 fired another shot, shattering a rock a few hundred meters away. Apart from the shattered stone shards, parts of the rock exploded all over the place. That's enough. At the forward supply base of Spring City's western defense line, Meng Tu couldn't help but slap the table. In the wilderness, be it humans or machines, they are all fucking lawless. Hurry up, activate the next set of backup equipment. As a senior officer of the Coastal Defense Force, Meng Tu was assigned a mission to relieve his boredom. It was supposed to be a leisure job similar to traveling, but now it seemed that his unreliable boss was the one who pushed the blame to him. His heart was filled with irritation. He nearly wanted to rip off the chain of discipline, but his many years of military discipline made him suppress this impulse. His voice only grew a bit coarser. You still haven't found out the origins of this X2? If you want to investigate here, Don't overlook the SCA's side. The officer next to him was the commander of this forward supply base, Major Guo. It was hard not to feel a bit awkward being overridden. But the disparity in military rank, the difference between the city defense force and the field army, and especially the distance between burners and normal people, made it impossible for him to say anything. He could only try to raise his presence. This X2 has clearly undergone major modifications. With such a degree of modification and the methods of those rats of the black market, it's unlikely that we'll be able to find anything. Perhaps we can consider it from the perspective of a highly destructive electromagnetic weapon. Meng Tu shook his head. It's not a simple electromagnetic weapon. That's right. Its modifications are very extreme. I'm saying that it's not just an electromagnetic weapon. Have you ever seen an electromagnetic rifle that can blast apart a mutant with a body of steel in one shot? Perhaps it uses special ammunition, if the density and weight of the ammunition exceeds. But there's no way to explain the intense combustion in the latter half. Speaking of which, Major Guo, the deep blue walkers in Spring City don't have a high conversion rate. Ah yes. Then I suggest that you find an opportunity to attend a short-term training class in the near future and gain a deeper understanding of the combat methods of the Deep Blue Walkers. It had to be said that Meng Tu wasn't Major Guo's direct superior. This statement sounded extremely harsh, but Major Guo had a good temper. At the very least, he didn't show any anger on the surface. He even humbly asked for guidance. What Senior Colonel Meng means is that this modification is somewhat similar to the Deep Blue Walkers. It's not a modification. It's a technique. This kind of enchantment technique can pour the special power of the format of fire into the ammunition of firearms. I really like using this move, but it's very difficult to accomplish alone. In order to achieve this, one must have extremely high attainments in the field of formatting. Among the people I know, Major General Tianbang is one of them. There's also that person from the He family. Meng Tu shook his head. You've digressed. What I mean is that this isn't just a matter of military equipment modification. It involves extraordinary power. It's not the format of fire, but an extraordinary power of electromagnetism. But this is clearly a robot. A robot. In the current world, all kinds of demons and ghosts have appeared. At this point, he turned his head to ask the intelligence officer beside him. I asked you to look for a match with the SCA. Have there been any results? The intelligence officer handed over a flexible screen. On it was a list that had just been pulled out. Meng Tu received it, swept his eyes over it, and spat. Is the SCA waiting for the new year? Even that damned Jin Tong can be listed first. Meng Tu looked at the list and couldn't find anything. But because of Jin Tong, he thought of that even more troublesome fellow. His heart grew increasingly irritated, and he slammed the table once more. It was at this time that the adjutant came over to inform him. There's a long-distance meeting at command in 5 minutes. It requires you, Professor Wu, and Professor Ding to participate. The meeting place is in the base's 4th conference room. Meeting all day long. Meng Tu threw the flexible screen on the table and stormed out. Inside the room, Major Guo shrugged his shoulders. He was about to relax his posture when he saw Meng Tu turn around and return. Once the backup surveillance is activated, immediately synchronize the relevant footage to my place. Major Guo reflexively stood at attention. Understood. Only then did Meng Tu leave. It took him a minute to reach the 4th conference room. He had just sat down, and before he even had a drink of water to calm himself down, 2 gray-haired old men came over together. He stood up and greeted them. Professor Wu, Professor Ding. Professor Wu Zhuanliang, who was in his 90s, still had a ruddy complexion. Even after nearly a month in the wilderness, his voice hadn't lowered at all. When he saw Meng Tu, he asked directly. The project team's sampling equipment went out of control, and there was a combat robot at the scene of the incident. Did you send it there? Can you guarantee that the sampling results will be back by today? Helpless, Meng Tu could only explain, we're still verifying the situation at the scene. Also, we haven't determined the origin of that combat robot. As he spoke, a signal came from Major Gua's side, synchronizing the footage collected by the third surveillance equipment. Meng Tu thought for a moment, then simply set it to projection mode and reported the situation to the two old professors. Before he could say more than 2 words, Wu Zhuanliang saw the NCOX-2 robot charging forward in a straight line on the projection. He couldn't help but slap the table. Holy sh*T. This is amazing, what a beautiful kill. Beside him, Professor Ding Zhiying, who was much more elegant and quiet, frowned. This will cause new variables to the aberrant ecology near the volcanic area, and the data that is currently being collected will be a mess again. Wu Zhuanliang scoffed at this statement. Aberrants are a mess to begin with. You're daydreaming if you want to do static research. Speaking of which, old Ding, your mindset should change. In the past, you worked on the ecosphere for research and protection, but now, do you still want to live together with these things? Screw you, you're the one living together. Hee, don't be fooled by our old Pan's wrinkled face. He's still cuter than these things. I've recorded this. Shall we play it for Sister Pan to hear later? Meng Tu could only sigh in his heart as the two leading ecobiologists bickered here. Fortunately, the remote conference soon began. Basically, it was still according to the established routine. They first reported the progress of all parties, then asked questions and found solutions. Meng Tu didn't turn off the projection. He was prepared to report the latest situation to the command center later. However, the main characters now were still the two old professors. There were meetings every day, but the problems wouldn't be refreshed every day. Professor Wu Zhuanliang turned around and interrogated the contact person. Right now, we've set up a grassroots team here in Spring City. Don't laugh, old Ding and I are both top-notch, and the students under us aren't idiots either. But right now, we don't even have the basic experimental conditions. Don't talk about the aberrant rebellion. I know that the wilderness laboratory here suffered heavy losses last year, but we can't just hole up in the supply base and do research, right? Do we make a round trip of nearly 1,000 kilometers every day just for the sake of parkour in the wilderness? The contact person coughed. Professor Wu, I was just about to report to you about the laboratory. We've already found a pretty good location with ready-made experimental sites and equipment. Before that, please allow me to introduce everyone to the project team's partner, Mr. Luo. At this moment, Professor Wu Zhuanliang noticed that there was an unfamiliar fellow who had been online the entire time but hadn't spoken. This person's face was rather thin, and the lines of muscle on his cheeks were rather heavy. He appeared rather stern and grave. Unlike the contact person who was used to speaking in a bureaucratic manner, this Mr. Luo wasn't one to beat around the bush. He went straight to the point. My company has a wilderness laboratory under its name. It was urgently closed during last year's riot and was isolated from the outside world. The damage it suffered wasn't that great. This laboratory is approximately 150 kilometers away from the target volcanic area. It's already a relatively forward position. If Professor Ding, Wu Zhuanliang was a bit baffled. This Mr. Luo's way of addressing him was clearly different from the way old Ding beside him addressed him. Wu Zhuanliang was a straightforward person, and if there was a question, he would ask, "You know me." Mr. Luo laughed when he heard this. His originally stern face became rather warm and intimate at this moment. Professor Wu, I'm a graduate of Acumen College 77's Biological Sciences Department. I once wanted to take the exam to become your doctoral student. I went to visit you with senior sister Qingwen and even ate at your place. Bang! Wu Zhuanliang slapped the table in realization. I remember you. You and Qingwen were in the same orphanage. Later on, you went with her to the wilderness. Before he even finished speaking, the remote communication screen began to shake incessantly. The conference room was only separated by a thread, but it also began to shake violently. The teacups on the table were knocked over with tinkling sounds. Meng Tu suddenly stood up and supported two old professors at the same time. He roared through the communicator. "Report the situation. Volcanic activity has been detected. There's also an earthquake. Look over there." Professor Ding pointed at the projection that still hadn't disappeared. "The Vulcan ants' defensive line has shrunk substantially. They're all retreating." Chapter 598. A ferocious flame-bellied monitor lizard was half lying on the ground. Even so, it was still as tall as a person. Below its belly was the slowly flowing lava. Not only did the lava of nearly 1,000 degrees not destroy its limbs, but it also provided it with the energy to persist. This was a very suitable battlefield for the flame-bellied monitor lizard. As far as the eye could see, dark red lava could be seen everywhere. Some of it flowed down the hill, and some simply gushed out between the heavily cracked ground. Although it was not as powerful as an explosive eruption, the scene of the earth cracking everywhere, as if it could completely collapse at any time, was equally thrilling. In a similar environment, the flame-bellied monitor lizard had killed countless invaders, and its total size could even fill the crater behind it. Almost all of its prey could not resist the fire poison it sprayed, and it could not resist the destructive lava it controlled. But at this moment, before it could cause any fatal damage to the metal creation in front of it, its tail and one of its forelimbs had been cut off, and it had lost most of its mobility. The lava fire intertwined with the gray skylight, but it was difficult to illuminate the specially treated armor coating, as if there was always a blurry dark domain. This grayish-black metal creation was only about 20 meters away from it. In the past, it could have pounced, but now it could only desperately accumulate strength, use the special abdomen of the mutated evolution to absorb the heat of the lava, and then open its mouth wide. Buzz! The heavy alloy javelin, carrying lightning, entered the mouth of the flame-bellied monitor lizard, and a small part of it penetrated its back. It exploded like a high-explosive bomb, magma splattered everywhere, and scales flew everywhere. Immediately, blazing electric flames shot out from the mouth, eye sockets, wounds, and even the cracks in the outer skin of the scale armor. The 2-ton body of the flame-bellied monitor lizard shrank in the blink of an eye. Its special body structure, which had evolved from the mutation, was also completely destroyed by this round of damage. The high temperature of the lava was finally revealed at this moment, and a small part of the body of the giant lizard was swallowed in a breath. However, in the burning flames of the giant lizard, there was still a blood-colored light. Electromagnetic Vanguard 1 silently stepped forward, stepping on the flat head of the flame-bellied monitor lizard, and also on the slowly flowing magma, walking to the top of the hill. The modified body based on the Sergeant X-2 model did not have the ability to resist the lava for a long time. However, when the high-temperature lava tried to devour the metal leg, it was repelled by an invisible force and slowly moved away. Number 1 crossed the line of defense of the giant fire-bellied lizards and set foot on the top of the erupting volcano. Now, the volcanic area that appeared in the optical imaging system was a real volcanic area. Within a radius of several hundred square kilometers, at least 70 to 80% of the craters were emitting thick smoke and lava. Dark red lines of fire crisscrossed the ground, cutting the area into pieces. Luonan had actually completed the goal of the first stage after killing the flame-belly monitor lizard. Although the Guardians, who had retreated under the control of the Vulcan ants, had already gathered in the central area and rebuilt the defensive line, most of them were unable to burrow underground and bathe in the lava to enter the core area. Number 1 could do it. Under Luonan's control, this combat machine stepped directly into the boiling pool of lava under the protection of a powerful magnetic shield. Of course, it was just passing by. Soon, it locked onto a certain gap in the inner wall of the volcano. It blasted apart a chunk of rock that had just been congealed and piled up not too long ago, revealing a narrow crack illuminated by the lava. Luo's civil engineering isn't bad. What should be praised was that Luo Nan was able to utilize the terrain to the greatest limit with his meticulous senses and reconnaissance over the past few days. He was able to open up a subway line to bypass the congestion on the surface. Number 1 was not the only passerby in this narrow passageway. The lava was like a flowing stream beneath its feet, extending even further into the crack. The densely packed Vulcan ants were lined up in rows within the hissing flowing lava. They borrowed the power of the lava to move faster. Their speed was not much slower than a normal person's walking speed. The Vulcan ants did not possess complete individual thinking, but they possessed a powerful group consciousness. Luo Nan could feel the faint evil intent that came from the nothingness, but this squad of Vulcan ants was still restrained by a high degree of discipline. They ignored the damage caused by the stomp of the combat machine and continued to flow back to the core area. The formation of the ant colony had yet to end when a buzzing sound assaulted them from within the dust-filled air. It was as if a swarm of locusts had passed through. A dark red cloud of blood suddenly gushed out from the crevice to the side. There were hundreds of thousands of winged Vulcan ants. They did not have the ability to fly long distances, but they were still able to advance forward at a faster speed within this narrow passageway. This speed was just about the same as Number 1's advancing speed. Number 1 was submerged within the cloud of blood as expected. Lava and the cloud of blood extended forward within the long and narrow crevice. There was a certain section in the middle that flickered with electricity and fire irregularly. This was the phenomenon formed by the electromagnetic shield repelling and killing the surrounding Vulcan ant. The surroundings were densely packed with flying ants, and their feet were even stepping on the lava. They were just remote-controlled combat machines. They were not here in person. Otherwise, Luo Nan could not guarantee that he would be able to maintain a calm state of mind. They were both Vulcan ants. They crawled within the lava and flew within the crevice, but there was a large difference in their body shape and body structure. But this was not strange in a volcanic area. According to Luo Nan's reconnaissance over the past 2 days, there were hundreds and thousands of Vulcan ant nests within a radius of 200 kilometers. They were widely distributed, and the direction of mutation evolution was a bit different within every nest. And since the lifespan of Vulcan ants was short, they replaced each other extremely quickly. Therefore, they were able to rapidly form differences in a short amount of time. This was simply a large-scale laboratory for genetic mutation. The branches of this laboratory in the wilderness had their own areas of activity. They were very territorial, and sometimes they would even kill each other. But they all had the same origin. They all belonged to one. The mutant nest. There was a direct relationship of subordination between the headquarters and the branches. Now that headquarters was in trouble, the entire branch had returned to assist. Luo Nan only had a few short days of observation. He did not know what these Vulcan ants would do when they gathered together. But he didn't want to add more variables to his plan, so he controlled Number 1 to speed up. The frequency of lightning flashing clearly increased within the blood cloud that pervaded the crevice. A series of crackling explosions rang out. Number 1's forward speed had already increased by 3 times, and the strength of the electromagnetic shield had increased correspondingly. This was to defend against the underground guardian that could come out at any time. The electromagnetic shield was an advanced technology that had yet to be realized by Earth's technology. It was formed from the integration of the seed imprint that was implanted into the combat machinery. Thus, a powerful electromagnetic field domain was formed with electromagnetic vanguard as the fulcrum. The domain pervaded the surroundings, and it could be retracted and released at will. This was the embryonic form of Jean Tong's extraordinary domain. Being able to realize this kind of effect proved that the potential of the seed imprint had been excavated to a new level. And under this stimulation, The corresponding information within the divine binding hoop and the virtual brain system was activated one after another. They provided Luonan with even more detailed and thorough application technology. Of course, the carriers of these application technologies were all indecipherable hieroglyphs. Luonan relied on the even more marvelous I-word to decipher a portion of the hieroglyphs with great difficulty. The divine binding hoop was the sole spoil of war from killing Jin Tong. Presumably, it had caused quite a bit of trouble for its previous owner. It had to be said that Jin Tong was truly a genius for being able to break into the extraordinary realm under these circumstances. High-level techniques required high-level consumption. 2,000 kilometers away in the underground laboratory of Gear, Luonan regulated his breathing in the simulation chamber to adapt to the ever-increasing pressure. Currently, the internal energy and transmission system of the electromagnetic Vanguard 1 had already retreated to a secondary position in the driving force. The main source of power came from the remote interference of Luonan's soul strength. Just the electromagnetic shield alone consumed an astronomical amount of energy. In addition, there was also the natural consumption of long-range interference. Even with Luonan's soul strength reserves, it was still quite strenuous. Fortunately, strands of marvelous energy seeped over from the depths of the void as Luonan approached the core region. The energy grew clearer and stronger. Good. Very good. Luonan let out a sigh of relief. This supplement was nothing compared to the overall consumption, but it was an extremely positive feedback. There was no energy in this world that was like water without a source or a tree without root. There was bound to be a source and a process of transformation. Luonan was fully aware of the entire process. His heart was all the more certain and excited. Number One's speed increased once more. Not only was it advancing towards its predetermined target, it was also tracing back to the source of the energy transformation. After advancing another 10 kilometers or so, Number One had already swapped out 2 passageways in the ground. One of these passageways was a shortcut that had just been created due to the earthquake. It was precisely because of this timely change that it was able to evade the even crazier attacks and interception of the Guardians. Even so, Number One's left arm was scorched and deformed by a tyrannical mutant that could transform into lava. A large chunk of the armor on its chest was lifted off, exposing the deformed components within. As for the narrow passageway behind it, a layer of burnt ashes had already filled the entire passageway. The ashes slowly rolled along with the flowing lava. Right now, there was a vertical distance of at least 90 meters between Number One and the surface of the Earth. The roars of the mutants had disappeared, but the violent upheaval of the Earth brought about by the volcano and the earthquake still filled this passageway with noise. In the end, it formed muddy rumbling vibrations. Luonan handed over the task of analyzing the ambient sounds to the auxiliary computing system. This was to avoid the topographical changes that could cause destructive damage. As for himself, his attention was completely penetrated into the depths of the surrounding dark void. He probed the abyss region. There, a weak incantation was spiraling and circulating. It continued on without end. This was the music that surged as the energy turbulence of the abyss region passed through the special structural form. As the output gradually stabilized, the incantation grew clearer and clearer. It grew louder and louder. In the end, it was simply like a majestic and even fanatical chorus. Blood, blood, blood. Fire, fire, fire. Chapter 599. Number One took 2 more steps forward and suddenly froze. Boom! Flames smashed through the rock wall in front of him, bringing with it a destructive wave of lava heat. In the sudden change of extreme environment, Number One's perception and computing functions were thrown into chaos for a moment. The metal body was somewhat stiff and out of control, but Luonan's mental senses weren't affected. Instead, they followed the fulcrum that was already stationed in this area and spread out. Then Luonan saw the spire-like building topple over on the other side of the collapsed rock wall. It crashed into the roaring and boiling lava, extinguishing in the blink of an eye. It wasn't strange for there to be such a building in the underground lava area. In fact, Number One's body had adapted to the extreme environment. It braved the tide-like lava waves and walked to the edge of the collapsed rock wall. Here, the enormous cavern in front of it, as well as the twisted demonic building community within the cavern, only presented a corner of the volcano to Number One. There were at least 10 enormous sealed structures scattered randomly in this enormous cavern with the lava as its base color. They were all made of rock and mud. They were of different sizes and were rather crude. They were connected to each other and to the rock walls of the surrounding mountain by pipes made of the same material. They crisscrossed and crisscrossed. One could see that they were building structures with clear functions at a glance. Perhaps it was the reflection of the lava's radiance, or perhaps it was the material or other factors, but these sealed structures radiated a dark red glow. They seemed to be burning at all times like enormous torches. They were very eye-catching. The dark red glow that radiated appeared to be flowing without end upon closer inspection. It was like the blood circulation system of an aberration. It didn't stop for a moment. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that the temperature was like fire in this volcanic lava environment. But there were tens of millions of fire god ants in this inferno-like building community. They were following the internal and external passageways, shuttling back and forth at high speed. Luonan's mental senses were able to detect that the dozen or so sealed structures exposed above the lava were nearly filled to the brim with fire god ant. More and more ants were advancing, one after the other, to the far end of the rock wall. They were even advancing deeper into the depths of the lava. That's right. Similar sealed structures and passageways existed widely in other locations of the mountain and the Earth's crust, beneath the unfathomable depths of the high-temperature lava. They were the ant rooms and ant tunnels built by this enormous colony of fire god ant. All of these structures together formed the entirety of the aberration nest. And this was only the lower part of the aberration nest. According to Luonan's probing observations over the past few days, this aberration nest included at least 200 ant rooms and 10 times the number of ant tunnels. There was no obvious pattern to their distribution. Some places were denser while others were thinner. Overall, they still formed the shape of an inverted pyramid. About a fifth of the lower portion was completely submerged in magma. And that was Luonan's final destination, the heart of the entire aberration nest, the queen of the fire god ants. It was also the core of the collective consciousness of the entire fire god ant society. The tremors of the mountain and the ground continued. Number One stood at the edge of the cliff for 3 to 5 seconds before another ant chamber was peeled off from the cliff. Together with tens of thousands of fire god ants, it fell heavily into the lava. Most ant chambers were connected to the surrounding mountains and strata. The volcanic activity in this area had probably been too intense, resulting in the collapse of the strata that supported it, exposing the ant chambers inside. From this, it could be seen that the ant chambers of the fire god ants were much sturdier than the surrounding rock strata. But these peculiar creations had lost their supporting foundation, and it was very difficult for them to maintain themselves in this vile environment for long periods of time. Such destructive tremors had the effects of natural disasters like volcanoes and earthquakes. There was also the forceful interference of the energy turbulence in the abyss region on the material plane, adding fuel to the flames. There was also the more direct impact from the depths of the lava. Right now, the lava below was surging with waves. There was no pattern to them at all. It was as if a dozen enormous monsters were fighting and struggling within. So much so that the rock walls below continued to crumble and fall, chiseling larger and larger holes. Under these circumstances, it was very difficult for Number One's auxiliary computing system to accurately monitor and judge the surrounding environment. It was as good as crippled. If it's crippled, then it's crippled. Number 1 had already completed its basic mission by being able to advance to this area. Luonan couldn't count on it to play any role in the future. Luonan soon made a decision. He controlled Number 1 to slide down along the rock wall. He used the most direct method to approach the critical area. The crumbling strata presented a very bad concave shape. There were practically no places for Luonan to borrow strength from. And in this extreme environment, Number 1's not-so-passable basic design exposed problems. Its external rocket propulsion system was intermittent. It simply relied on the electromagnetic shield to roll down like a rubber ball. As for braking and so on, Luonan had to rely on the help of the alloy combat knife. Such a sorry state completely obliterated the valiant appearance of No. 1 from its sharp knife charge in the previous few hours. Luonan couldn't care less. He controlled Number 1 to slide down another 40 meters or so. The surrounding air was becoming even more viscous. Enormous noises. Noises that originated from the two directions of the material plane and the abyss region's void had already blasted and kneaded together. They radiated a tyrannical psychic pressure that was distorted and chaotic. An invisible whirlpool of turbulence swept up within the Inferno prison. Right now, Luonan could clearly feel the collision and conflict of the two forces within. On one side was the great chorus of blood, 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 fire, fire, fire. It appeared to be fanatical, but in fact, it occupied the dominant position within the abyss region's void. Its energy circulation was extremely strange and miraculous. On the other side was the enormous heat source entrenched in the volcanic strata here. It was in a relatively rough and wild mode of operation, charging back and forth. Although a huge amount of energy was wasted at every moment in this environment, it was almost as if it was replenished at any time, inexhaustible and inexhaustible. Emoluan did well. The fire god ants. They really did make the right choice. The conductor of the great chorus was undoubtedly Emoluan. This puppet that resided within the Blood Soul Temple only had that tyrannical combat instinct left. Even now, he was still able to bring out such a remarkable method of circulation. Even with the powerful enhancement of the Blood Soul Temple, he was worthy of being an expert that was only a step away from transcendence. As for the leading force of the enormous heat source, it was naturally the fire god ant colony. The fire god ant colony's consciousness was quite disciplined. Combined with the enormous ant nest structure that covered the volcanic region, they formed a complete energy circulation and utilization system within an area of nearly 1,000 square kilometers. Even though there were various inefficiencies within, and they were unavoidably restricted by the natural environment, they still possessed inconceivable power due to their enormous base. If they were to contend against the fire god ant head-on, all of the transcendence on Earth, be it physical or mental, would be crushed by the fire god ant. Then there would be nothing for Luonan to do, and there would be no plans. All he had to do was pat his ass and get the hell out of here. But today's facts proved that even if one had an overwhelming advantage in strength, one might not necessarily be able to gain the upper hand without the corresponding high-end circulation technique. One might even be able to be used by others. Otherwise, where would the energy Luonan was using to replenish himself come from? Right now, Emoluan seemed to be piloting a floating power generation platform. He was drifting on the vast ocean. The enormous waves that reached the heavens didn't topple this platform. Instead, they provided powerful tidal energy, helping the platform complete a series of energy transformations. Right now, this transformation mode was still a rootless duckweed, but Luonan believed that it wouldn't be long before there would be a huge change. The progress of the forced infusion transformation is okay. It's just that I'm a bit uncertain when I put the seed in. It really won't do. I'll ask Ruewan to help. Has she finished her class yet? While Luonan was distracted, a heat wave of lava that was several dozen meters tall suddenly surged within the enormous void. It nearly filled the entire void in an instant, swallowing number 1 whole. The electromagnetic shield was raised to the highest level in an instant. This was the instantaneous limit of Luo Nan's soul strength when it came to interfering with the material plane. Even the depths of the layers of dark red lava had blue-white lightning tenaciously leaping about. It held on for at least 2 seconds, but in the end it was scattered and shattered. Luo Nan knew that the instantaneous influx of energy had caused quite a bit of damage to the combat machine. But this was already meaningless. This was because the surging wave of lava had smashed the combat machine into pieces. The faint sounds of the body fragments exploding were drowned out by the enormous background noise of the void. There was no value in saving it. Such a tyrannical attack was the result of the seething evil thoughts of the fire god ant colony. But this wasn't necessarily directed at number 1. According to Mo Luan's feedback, this was more like a venting action of the colony after repeated failed attack. Luo Nan could see that more than half of the dozen ant chambers within the enormous void had collapsed due to the attack just now. This part of the blood circulation system, which could be considered complete, had a large area of necrosis in the blink of an eye. Harming others and harming oneself. It was nothing more than this. TSK. How violent. Luckily, I specially chose a high melting point tantalum alloy. I also did some heat insulation. Number 1's head module was still considered complete, as well as half of its chest and shoulder armor. This was the largest wreckage that Luo Nan's electromagnetic shield could protect. Its body functions had already been completely lost. Its only function now was to protect the metal core in the high-temperature lava, so that it wouldn't be quickly destroyed. Currently, the wreckage of Number 1's body had completely lost its ability to move. It was slowly sinking in the lava. In the extreme environment of the lava, the interaction between mind and matter was severely limited. Forcefully obtaining a driving force was not desirable, and this was not a good opportunity. So it could only be a mechanical beauty that quietly watched from the sidelines for now.